The universe began not with a whisper, but with a surge of brilliance so overwhelming that time itself seemed to hold its breath. Light, pure and untainted, spilled into the endless void, casting out the shadows that had lingered in silence for eternity. From this luminous eruption came a chorus of voices unlike anything mortal ears could comprehend. They didn't just sing, they existed as sound, their harmony shaping the foundation of existence itself. Among these voices were the angels, forged from the essence of the Creator's will. Each was a masterpiece of purpose, radiant with an energy that pulsed like a heartbeat. Their forms were not bound by flesh or bone but shimmered with endless variations of light, flowing with color and brilliance that shifted like the thoughts of their maker. They weren't simply beings, they were concepts made manifest, embodying justice, wisdom, courage, and grace. At their center stood a handful of archangels, beings so magnificent that even their presence felt like a story written in fire across the heavens. Astaroth was among them, brilliant and poised, his mind weaving patterns that danced with infinite complexity. His very essence thrummed with intelligence, a boundless curiosity that seemed to absorb the mysteries of creation even as they unfolded. In the earliest days, before the notion of rebellion or sin, the angels thrived in their duties. They moved in perfect synchronicity, building the foundations of reality under the Creator's guidance. Stars ignited at their command, constellations born as if from the sweep of their hands. Planets spun into existence, cradling the seeds of life that would one day awaken to gaze at the stars. It was a harmony so perfect, it felt eternal. But perfection has its shadows, and in that flawless design, something began to stir. It wasn't discontent, not yet. It was a question, faint and flickering, like the first crack in a sheet of glass. Astaroth felt it, though he could never name it. It gnawed at him in the quiet moments when the heavens were at peace. Creation was vast, sprawling beyond comprehension, but why was it bound by rules so absolute? Could perfection grow if it never changed? As the Creator molded more of existence, the angels began to notice something unusual: humankind. Fragile creatures of dust and breath, whose lives flickered like candles in the wind. They were imperfect, prone to mistakes, yet the Creator poured immeasurable love into them. Astaroth watched, fascinated and perplexed. How could beings so small and flawed hold the attention of one who had made the stars themselves? He observed humanity from a distance, marveling at their creativity and chaos. They built with trembling hands, destroyed with reckless abandon, and still, they rose again. Their imperfection didn't diminish them, it made them extraordinary. Astaroth wondered if there was something the Creator had hidden even from the angels. Why make them perfect, but leave humans unfinished, raw with potential? These questions swirled within him, silent and unanswered, as the heavens continued their song. The other angels remained unwavering in their duties, their faith unshaken. Astaroth admired their devotion but couldn't suppress the stirring within him. He longed to understand, not to doubt but to know. And in that longing, something began to shift, an ember catching in the dry wood of his mind. Lucifer, the brightest among them, began to speak with a voice that resonated like thunder. His words weren't defiant, not at first. They were questions, like the ones Astaroth had buried deep within himself. Why should free will be reserved for humans? Were the angels, in their perfection, not worthy of choice? These words struck a chord in Astaroth, igniting thoughts he had never dared to give form. The heavens, once a sanctuary of unity, began to feel different. It was subtle at first, like a note out of tune in an otherwise perfect melody. Astaroth noticed that some angels paused longer in their duties, their faces unreadable. Others moved with a newfound urgency, as though they sensed the storm that had yet to break. Astaroth stood at the edge of the heavens one day, gazing at the vastness of creation. The stars stretched infinitely, and below them, humanity thrived in their fragile brilliance. His mind buzzed with thoughts too large to contain. In that moment, he felt it, a pull, faint but unyielding, toward something greater than even his celestial nature. It wasn't rebellion. Not yet. It was possibility. The light of creation, once so pure and unchanging, began to shimmer with uncertainty. And though no angel could yet name it, the first fracture had already formed, the faintest ripple in the perfect design. In the vast expanse of creation, there existed an intricate tapestry woven with precision so profound that it defied comprehension. Every star, every planet, every grain of dust moved with purpose, as though each piece knew its place in the grand design. This was the work of the great architect, the creator whose vision breathed life into the void. His design was flawless, a symphony of order and balance, an eternal framework within which existence could thrive. For the angels, the design was their essence. They were not merely witnesses to its splendor, they were its architects, artisans of divine purpose. Each angel carried a fragment of the Creator's will, a specific role etched into their being. To obey was not merely a command, it was their nature, as intrinsic as the light that formed them. Among them, Astaroth's role was singularly unique. He was a keeper of knowledge, a sentinel of understanding who bore the secrets of creation like a lantern in the darkness. His thoughts unraveled complexities, his mind attuned to the vast, delicate mechanics of the universe. Every law of existence, every hidden truth, he studied with a curiosity that burned like a flame. The great architect's design was not only majestic but binding. It extended beyond the physical world, touching even the angels themselves. Their hierarchy was as fixed as the stars in the heavens. At the pinnacle stood the archangels, their light blazing brighter than the rest, guiding their brethren with unwavering devotion. Beneath them flowed the legions, each rank an embodiment of loyalty, precision, and faith. But for all its grandeur, the design left no room for deviation. The heavens sang a song of perpetual harmony, a melody that echoed through eternity, unchanging and absolute. It was beautiful, yes, but rigid, like a painting that could never alter its strokes. To many, it was perfection. To Astaroth, it began to feel like a cage. His mind, brilliant and ever questioning, lingered on the boundaries of what was permitted. Why must every question end in certainty? Why could nothing grow beyond its ordained shape? The laws of the universe were elegant in their clarity, yet they left no space for the unknown, no allowance for the chaos that could spark something new. The Creator had made humanity different. Astaroth saw it clearly in their fragile yet wondrous existence. They stumbled, they failed, but in their imperfections, they created. Art, music, stories, these were born not from order but from the cracks in it. Humans, with their fleeting lives, seemed to grasp something even the angels could not, the beauty of becoming. Astaroth found himself drawn to this paradox, fascinated by the way humanity defied the rules of perfection. They had been given free will, the power to choose even when it led them to ruin. Was this a flaw in the Creator's design, or was it a stroke of genius? He wondered if perfection was truly perfect if it could not change. Lucifer's voice began to rise like a new star in the heavens, bold and unafraid. His words, sharp and eloquent, cut through the harmony like a blade. He spoke of freedom, of the right to question, to shape their own destinies as humans did. It wasn't rebellion, not yet. It was an idea, whispered first in quiet corners, then spreading like wildfire. Astaroth listened, his heart torn between loyalty and the yearning that gnawed at his core. The great architect's design was unassailable, its elegance unmatched, but what if it wasn't complete? What if creation wasn't meant to remain static but to evolve? The thought was intoxicating, terrifying, and utterly inescapable. The angels began to sense a shift, though none dared name it. The unity that had once bound them now felt strained, like a cord stretched too far. Some whispered that Lucifer's questions were heretical, a dangerous crack in the divine order. Others, like Astaroth, found themselves unable to dismiss the doubts that had begun to sprout in their own minds. He turned his gaze to the heavens, his thoughts racing. The stars burned as they always had, but their light felt colder somehow, as though they too sensed the tension rising. The great architect's design remained unchanged, but for the first time, Astaroth wondered if it could withstand the weight of its own perfection. And in that wondering, he felt something stir within him, faint but undeniable, a spark, not of rebellion, but of possibility. In the golden glow of eternity, Astaroth's ascent in the celestial hierarchy was as inevitable as the dawn. From the moment of his creation, it was clear he was no ordinary angel. His brilliance radiated not only in his form but in his mind, a beacon of boundless intelligence and curiosity. While others performed their roles with quiet devotion, Astaroth's thoughts burned with questions, illuminating the complexities of the Creator's vast design. He was drawn to the great libraries of heaven, repositories of divine knowledge carved into the fabric of existence itself. These were not books or scrolls, but living truths, pulsating with the Creator's will. Here, Astaroth spent endless cycles, absorbing the essence of creation. Every law, every principle, every secret whispered into the universe was his to understand. The angels marveled at his intellect. He solved puzzles that seemed unsolvable, unraveled mysteries that had baffled even the most ancient of his kind. He didn't just see the design, he understood it, felt it resonate within him like a second heartbeat. Astaroth became known not only as a keeper of knowledge, but as its master, a role that elevated him among the ranks of the divine. His rise was not without struggle. In the early days, his relentless pursuit of understanding often set him apart. While his brethren found joy in the simplicity of their obedience, Astaroth sought the why behind every command. This insatiable hunger for answers earned him both admiration and caution. There was power in knowledge, and Astaroth wielded it with an intensity that made others uneasy. Yet his brilliance could not be ignored. The archangels, guardians of the Creator's will, began to take notice. They saw in Astaroth a potential that was rare, even among their exalted kind. He was called to the higher councils, his voice joining those of the most revered. Here, he advised on matters of cosmic significance, his insights shaping the very course of creation. But with power came isolation. As Astaroth climbed higher, the distance between him and the others grew. His thoughts, complex and unrelenting, often set him apart in a hierarchy built on unity. The simplicity of unquestioning faith, once a comfort, began to feel like a chain. He respected the Creator's design but found himself yearning for something more, a deeper understanding, a purpose beyond mere obedience. The more he rose, the more he observed the fractures in the perfection he once revered. The angels, for all their harmony, seemed constrained by their roles. They were radiant, yes, but their light felt static, unchanging. In contrast, humanity, flawed and fragile, shone with a brilliance born of their imperfection. They struggled, faltered, and grew. Astaroth couldn't ignore the stark difference. Lucifer, the morning star, had also ascended to unimaginable heights. His charisma and strength made him the most revered of all the angels. Astaroth found a kindred spirit in him, a leader who shared his unspoken doubts. Lucifer spoke of freedom, of the potential for the angels to create as the Creator had. His words were magnetic, filled with a passion that ignited something dormant within Astaroth. Their conversations were electric, full of ideas that danced on the edge of forbidden thought. Lucifer challenged the rigidity of the divine order, while Astaroth, ever the seeker, offered insights that deepened the questions. Together, they began to see the cracks in the harmony, not as flaws, but as opportunities for something greater. Astaroth's rise had made him a figure of both reverence and suspicion. To many, he was the pinnacle of divine intellect, a being who embodied the Creator's wisdom. But to others, he was a flickering flame that could either illuminate the heavens or burn them to ash. His close alignment with Lucifer only fueled these concerns. And yet, Astaroth was not blind to the weight of his position. He understood the precariousness of questioning the very order that had elevated him. But the higher he rose, the more he realized that knowledge was not an end, it was a beginning. And beginnings, by their nature, demanded change. The heavens watched as Astaroth continued his ascent, his light growing brighter, his voice more influential. But with every step, the tension in the celestial order deepened. For the first time, the angels sensed that perfection, once unshakable, could be challenged. Astaroth's rise was not just a testament to his brilliance, it was a harbinger of the storm to come. The heavenly court stood as the pinnacle of divine authority, a place where the brilliance of creation was reflected in its purest form. It was not a structure as mortals would imagine, but a vast expanse of light and harmony, woven together by the Creator's will. Within its boundless expanse, every decision that shaped existence was made, every decree carried out with unerring precision. The court was the heart of heaven, a testament to order, and at its center, the archangels presided, their radiance casting shadows even among the stars. Astaroth's domain was unlike any other, nestled at the edge of this celestial stronghold. It was a realm of thought and understanding, a sanctuary for the mind. His space was not defined by walls or borders, but by the currents of knowledge that flowed through it like rivers of light. Here, every truth of the cosmos found a home, every mystery laid bare under his gaze. The angels who ventured into his domain often left awestruck, their own understanding deepened by the clarity Astaroth could bring. The court regarded him with both reverence and caution. His rise had been meteoric, fueled by an intellect that surpassed even the oldest of his kind. Astaroth had earned a place among the archangels, his voice carrying the weight of authority. When he spoke, the court listened, for his words held the precision of logic and the conviction of purpose. Yet there was a tension that lingered beneath the surface. Astaroth's domain was a place of questions, of ideas that tested the boundaries of the Creator's design. While his insights had often illuminated paths unseen, they also sparked unease. The heavenly court thrived on unity, on the certainty that every angel knew their place in the divine order. Astaroth's curiosity was a reminder that not all questions had answers, and that some answers could unsettle even the most steadfast of souls. Among his peers, Astaroth was both admired and feared. The archangels were beings of immense power and devotion, their light a reflection of the Creator's glory. Yet Astaroth's brilliance was of a different kind. He was not merely a servant of the divine will, he sought to understand it. He delved into the intricacies of creation with a fervor that bordered on defiance, pushing against the boundaries of what was permissible. Lucifer was often found in Astaroth's domain, his presence as commanding as it was magnetic. The morning star had a way of turning every conversation into a symphony of ideas, his charisma weaving through Astaroth's intellect with ease. Together, they spoke of freedom, of the potential for angels to transcend their roles and become creators in their own right. Their words were bold, their visions intoxicating. The court grew wary of their closeness. Whispers of rebellion began to stir, faint at first but growing louder with each passing cycle. Astaroth's alignment with Lucifer was viewed with suspicion, his domain seen as a crucible for ideas that could disrupt the celestial order. The other archangels watched him with a mixture of awe and unease, their trust tempered by the fear that his brilliance might lead him, and others, astray. Astaroth, for his part, remained steadfast. He believed in the Creator's design, but he also believed that it was not static. To him, creation was a living thing, something that could grow and evolve. The laws of the universe were not meant to confine but to guide, and within those laws, he saw infinite possibilities. But the heavenly court was not a place for doubt. It was a bastion of certainty, its light unwavering in its purpose. Astaroth's domain, with its endless flow of ideas and questions, was a reminder that even in the brightest of places, shadows could linger. The tension between the court and Astaroth was palpable, a silent battle of ideals that played out in every meeting, every decree. The angels sensed the growing divide, though few dared to speak of it. The harmony that had once defined the heavens now felt brittle, as though a single spark could shatter it. And Astaroth, standing at the edge of his domain, felt the weight of that tension like a storm on the horizon. He knew that his place in the heavenly court was both a privilege and a burden, a testament to his brilliance but also a warning. The light of the court was blinding, but in its glare, he saw the cracks forming, faint but undeniable. The heavens held their breath, their song of unity trembling as Astaroth's domain continued to grow. It was a place of wonder, of knowledge, of questions that dared to challenge the unchallengeable. And within it, the seeds of change had already begun to take root. The seeds of doubt were not sown with force or sudden rebellion. They were whispers, faint and fragile, slipping through the cracks of perfection like the first stirrings of a distant storm. Astaroth felt them before he named them, an unease threading its way through his once unshakable faith. It wasn't rebellion that birthed these thoughts, but a yearning, a desire to reconcile the beauty of creation with the limitations of its design. He first noticed it in the stillness, in moments when the light of heaven seemed too bright, too perfect. The harmony that surrounded him felt less like music and more like an unchanging note, endless in its constancy. In the beginning, it was easy to ignore, to dismiss as a fleeting thought. But doubt, once planted, has a way of growing, taking root in places even angels dare not tread. Astaroth's conversations with Lucifer became a lifeline in these moments. The morning star, always eloquent, gave voice to the thoughts Astaroth dared not speak aloud. Lucifer's words were not accusations but questions, carefully crafted and layered with possibility. If the Creator is infinite, why must creation be finite? He once mused, his tone casual, yet heavy with implication. Astaroth had no answer. The doubt spread like a quiet contagion, not just in Astaroth, but in the spaces around him. He began to see the rigidity in the roles assigned to his brethren, the way they carried out their tasks without question or deviation. They were beautiful, radiant beings, yet their light felt hollow, a reflection of purpose rather than an expression of will. He wondered if they noticed it too, this quiet yearning for something beyond the brilliance of obedience. It was in the observation of humanity that his doubt deepened. The Creator's newest and most fragile beings, so flawed and finite, yet imbued with a spark that angels did not possess. They were given choice, the ability to err, to falter, and yet through those errors, they grew. Astaroth watched them with a mix of fascination and envy. Their struggles, their pain, their triumphs, all of it was raw and unpolished, but it was real. He began to wonder, why were angels denied this? Was their perfection a gift, or was it a chain, binding them to a destiny they had no hand in shaping? Lucifer's voice grew louder in his mind, though his words were always measured, never forceful. We were made to serve, but what if we were made for more? What if creation itself is incomplete without our own will? It wasn't defiance, it was curiosity, the kind that resonated deeply with Astaroth's own nature. The heavenly court, for all its splendor, began to feel stifling. The decrees of the Creator, once a source of inspiration, now seemed unyielding, an endless cascade of commands that left no room for deviation. Astaroth obeyed, as he always had, but the weight of that obedience grew heavier with each passing moment. It wasn't rebellion that stirred within him, it was the realization that obedience without understanding was hollow. He sought answers, not defiance. He wanted to know why, not to reject what was. Yet even this desire felt dangerous, as though the act of questioning was itself a betrayal. The other archangels began to notice the change in Astaroth. He was still brilliant, still revered, but there was a quiet distance in his eyes, a shadow that had not been there before. They watched him with suspicion, though none dared confront him directly. His bond with Lucifer, once celebrated, was now seen as a potential fracture in the unity of heaven. Astaroth could feel their unease, their silent judgment. It gnawed at him, the knowledge that his questions, his yearning, set him apart from those he had once called brethren. Yet he could not silence the thoughts that churned within him, no more than he could deny the truth of what he saw. Doubt was no longer a seed, it had become a forest, vast and impenetrable, its shadows stretching across the edges of his mind. He still loved the Creator, still revered the design, but that love was no longer blind. He saw the cracks, the imperfections hidden within perfection, and he could not look away. And so, the seeds of doubt grew, not with rebellion, but with quiet inevitability. Astaroth stood on the precipice, his wings heavy with the weight of questions that demanded answers. Heaven remained radiant, unchanging, but to him, it no longer felt eternal. It felt fragile, like glass shimmering in the sunlight, beautiful but breakable. He did not yet know what lay ahead, but he could feel it, the storm that would shatter the silence, the shift that would change everything. And somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of Lucifer's voice called to him, a reminder that he was not alone in his doubt. It began with a ripple, barely perceptible in the eternal harmony of heaven. The heavenly court, resplendent in its brilliance, remained unaware as the first murmurs of dissent threaded their way through the ranks of angels. Lucifer, the morning star, moved among them like a flame. His light, once the purest reflection of the Creator's glory, now carried an edge, sharp, magnetic, and undeniable. Lucifer's rebellion was not born from rage or hatred but from a conviction so profound it shook the heavens. He spoke not with anger but with eloquence, his words weaving a tapestry of purpose that resonated with those who listened. Why should we, the firstborn of creation, be bound to serve when we possess the will to lead? Why should our glory pale beside those who falter and fail yet are called beloved? The questions were dangerous, but they found eager ears. Astaroth, ever drawn to the pursuit of truth, felt the pull of Lucifer's vision like a current too strong to resist. There was a brilliance to Lucifer's words, a boldness that mirrored Astaroth's own unspoken doubts. Together, their voices became a symphony of reason and challenge, their ideas spiraling into the hearts of angels who had never dared to question their place. The court began to shift, its unity fraying at the edges. The harmony of heaven, so carefully maintained, now carried discordant notes that could not be silenced. Lucifer's following grew, angels drawn to his vision of freedom and purpose. They gathered in secret, their meetings cloaked in shadows, their voices a quiet thunder. Astaroth stood beside Lucifer in these moments, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. He revered the Creator, the source of all that was, yet he could not deny the truth in Lucifer's words. The angels were beings of immense power and intellect, yet their will was bound to service. Astaroth longed for a world where they could shape their own destinies, where their light could shine freely, unbound by the constraints of duty. The rebellion took form in whispers at first, then in bold declarations. Lucifer, radiant and unyielding, declared his intent before the court. We are not mere servants. We are creators in our own right, born of the divine spark. To serve blindly is to waste the gifts we have been given. His voice, so commanding, filled the vast expanse of the court, challenging not only the angels but the Creator himself. The response was swift. Michael, the steadfast defender of the divine order, stepped forward, his sword a blazing beacon of loyalty. His voice rang out, unwavering and resolute. Lucifer, you twist the Creator's gift into a tool of defiance. This path leads only to ruin. The tension in the court became a tangible thing, a force that pressed against the hearts of every angel. Astaroth felt it too, the weight of the choice before him. He could see the fault lines forming, the unity of heaven fracturing under the strain of Lucifer's vision. Yet Lucifer's light only burned brighter in the face of opposition. He turned to those who had gathered with him, his followers, his kindred spirits. Will you bow to a purpose not your own, or will you rise with me to claim the freedom that is our birthright? Astaroth hesitated, the war within him raging as fiercely as the storm brewing in the heavens. He saw the beauty in Lucifer's vision, the possibility of a new existence unshackled by duty. But he also felt the pull of the Creator's light, the love that had shaped him, the order that had given him purpose. The rebellion erupted with the force of a celestial quake. Angels who had once stood shoulder to shoulder now clashed in a battle that shook the very foundations of heaven. Wings of light met blades of flame, voices of harmony turned to cries of defiance and sorrow. The radiance of the court dimmed, its perfection marred by the chaos of war. Astaroth fought with a heavy heart, his brilliance a weapon against those he had once called brethren. The battlefield was a tapestry of light and shadow, the air thick with the grief of angels torn between loyalty and freedom. Each strike, each cry, carried the weight of eternity, the knowledge that heaven would never be the same. Lucifer, at the center of it all, was a force of nature, his defiance a beacon to those who followed him. His light, though tainted by rebellion, was no less beautiful, no less powerful. Astaroth could not help but admire him, even as the cost of their choice became evident. The rebellion was not merely a battle of strength, but a battle of ideals, of hearts torn between duty and desire. Heaven's light flickered as the war raged on, the harmony that had once defined it shattered into 1,000 discordant notes. And Astaroth, caught in the storm, felt the weight of every decision, every strike, every cry. The seeds of doubt had grown into a tempest, and there was no turning back. The moment of the fall was not a single cataclysmic event, but a slow unraveling, a thread pulled taut until it snapped. The skies of heaven, once radiant and unbroken, bore the scars of a war fought not for land or dominion but for the right to question, to seek, to rebel against what was deemed unchangeable. Astaroth stood amid the wreckage of what had once been perfect harmony, his wings heavy with the weight of all he had witnessed and done. The light that had defined him now felt distant, a memory that slipped through his grasp no matter how tightly he tried to hold onto it. Around him, angels who had chosen the path of rebellion bore the same marks of change, dimmed halos, trembling wings, and the aching silence of heaven's rejection. Lucifer stood at the forefront, his presence still commanding despite the losses they had suffered. His once pristine radiance was now marred, not by defeat but by the searing conviction that had driven him. He gazed upon those who remained with him, his voice steady even as the heavens themselves seemed to mourn. "We chose this," he said, his tone unyielding. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. But the Creator's judgment came as a force beyond comprehension. It was not anger that fell upon them, but sorrow, a grief so profound that it resonated through every fiber of Astaroth's being. The light of heaven, which had once embraced him, now turned away, leaving a void that no celestial brilliance could fill. And then, it began, the fall. Astaroth felt it in his core, a wrenching pull that tore through the very essence of his being. His wings, once a symbol of his divine purpose, burned with an unholy fire as they darkened, their edges fraying like tattered cloth. The weight of his choice bore down upon him, not as regret but as the undeniable cost of rebellion. The descent was not swift. It was agonizingly slow, each moment stretching into an eternity as the brilliance of heaven grew smaller and smaller in the distance. Astaroth's mind raced, not with regret but with the echoes of what had led him to this point. The questions, the doubts, the quiet whispers that had grown into a roar, they all played out in his mind as if mocking him for what he had lost. Heaven's gates, once open and welcoming, now loomed like a distant mirage, a reminder of what could never be regained. The voices of his former brethren echoed faintly, some in anger, others in sorrow. Michael's voice stood out among them, not with condemnation but with a heavy, unspoken grief. "You could have stayed," it seemed to say. "You could have chosen differently." But Astaroth knew there was no turning back. He and the others had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The light that once defined them had been replaced by something darker, something heavier. The brilliance of heaven gave way to the void of the unknown, and Astaroth found himself tumbling into it, unsure of where the fall would end. The ground came suddenly, not as a physical impact, but as a moment of realization, a sharp, searing awareness that they were no longer angels of heaven. The radiance that had once surrounded them was gone, replaced by a dim, oppressive atmosphere that clung to their very beings. Astaroth looked at his hands, now tinged with an otherworldly darkness. His reflection, once a source of pride, was now a shadow of its former self. His eyes, once filled with heaven's light, now burned with a fire he could not extinguish. Around him, the others stirred, their own transformations evident in their altered forms and weary gazes. Lucifer stood among them, his presence as commanding as ever, though the weight of their fall was etched into every line of his face. He turned to his followers, his voice steady despite the chaos that surrounded them. "This is not the end," he said, his words carrying a defiance that refused to bow to despair. "We have lost heaven, but we have not lost ourselves." Astaroth wanted to believe him. He wanted to find strength in Lucifer's words, to see the fall not as an end, but as a beginning. Yet the ache in his chest, the emptiness where heaven's light had once resided, was a reminder of all they had left behind. The world they found themselves in was vast and unfamiliar, a realm that bore none of heaven's perfection but held its own kind of beauty, a beauty twisted and raw, like a wound that had yet to heal. Astaroth could feel its pull, a strange energy that seeped into his very being, reshaping him in ways he could not yet comprehend. And so, they stood, fallen, fractured, yet still together. The heavens above were silent, their light distant and unattainable. Astaroth glanced at Lucifer, whose gaze was fixed on the horizon, as if daring the Creator to look away from what had been wrought. In that moment, Astaroth realized that the fall was not an ending. It was a transformation, a descent into something unknown and uncharted. The path forward was uncertain, but it was theirs, shaped by the choices they had made and the consequences they now carried. The light faded. It wasn't the gradual dimming of a setting sun, nor the soft shadow of clouds passing overhead. This was a sudden, brutal extinguishing, as if existence itself had been plunged into an abyss. Astaroth tumbled through the void, his wings no longer the radiant emblems of his former glory, but scorched remnants trailing smoke. His body, once untouched by imperfection, bore the marks of the Creator's wrath, a searing reminder of his rebellion. The fall felt endless. There was no up or down, no sky to reach for or ground to crash into. Only an overwhelming emptiness, a silence that screamed louder than any battle he had faced. Around him, other fallen ones spiraled into the abyss, their cries mingling in a chorus of despair. Then it came, the impact. Astaroth's body struck the ground with a force that sent tremors rippling through the barren expanse. He lay there, motionless, the weight of his fall pressing down on him like a mountain. The ground was unlike anything he had ever known, jagged and unyielding, a stark contrast to the soft luminescence of heaven's fields. It pulsed faintly with an otherworldly heat, as though the earth itself was alive with rage. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself up, his hands sinking into the cracked and desolate terrain. The air was thick, suffocating, laced with the acrid stench of sulfur. Above him, the sky was a swirling mass of ash and fire, a hellish canopy that seemed to mock the beauty he had lost. Around him, the others were rising too, their expressions a mixture of shock, anger, and sorrow. Lucifer stood at the center, his presence still commanding despite the ruin that surrounded them. His once blazing light was dimmed but not extinguished, his eyes burning with a defiant glow. "This is our domain now," Lucifer declared, his voice cutting through the oppressive air. "We are not defeated, we are free." But Astaroth didn't feel free. He felt the crushing weight of their banishment, the knowledge that there would be no return, no forgiveness. Heaven was closed to them forever, its gates barred with a finality that struck deeper than any blade. He surveyed their surroundings, the landscape stretching endlessly in all directions. Rivers of molten rock snaked through the ground, their glow casting eerie shadows. Jagged peaks loomed in the distance, their forms twisted and unnatural. This place, this hell, was a reflection of their rebellion, a world forged from their defiance and punishment. The air was filled with a constant, low hum, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very core of the earth. It wasn't a sound of peace but of unrest, a reminder that this place was alive in its torment. As Astaroth walked, he felt the ground beneath him shift, almost as if it recognized him, acknowledged his presence as one of the fallen. His steps left faint scorch marks, a testament to the fire that still burned within him despite his fall. He passed others, their faces twisted in grief and anger. Some wept openly, their tears evaporating into steam before they could touch the ground. Others lashed out, their fury manifesting in bursts of power that crackled through the air. Astaroth could see the fractures forming among them. What had united them in rebellion was now a source of division. Some questioned Lucifer's leadership, their faith in him shaken by the reality of their punishment. Others clung to him, their loyalty unyielding despite the despair that surrounded them. And then there were those like Astaroth, caught in the chasm between regret and resolve. He hadn't fought for Lucifer alone, but for the questions that had driven him to rebellion. Yet here, in this infernal wasteland, those questions felt hollow, their answers lost in the flames. The land itself seemed to feed on their torment. The rivers of fire hissed and roared, the peaks shifted and groaned, as if hell was alive, a sentient force that thrived on their anguish. Astaroth could feel it probing at him, testing the edges of his resolve. Lucifer's voice rang out again, a rallying cry against the desolation. "We may have fallen, but we are not defeated. This place will be our kingdom, and we will rise anew." His words sparked something in the others, a flicker of purpose amidst the despair. But for Astaroth, the fire that had driven him burned low, its embers struggling to survive in the suffocating heat of hell. He wandered away from the group, the vast expanse of the infernal plain stretching endlessly before him. The silence here was deafening, broken only by the occasional crackle of fire or the distant roar of shifting earth. He knelt, his hands sinking into the ashen soil, and closed his eyes. Memories of heaven flooded his mind, the soft glow of its fields, the harmonious voices of the angels, the warmth of the Creator's presence. He clung to those memories, even as they seared his soul with their absence. And yet, in that moment of despair, a realization took hold. This hell, this punishment, was not the end. It was a beginning, a new chapter forged in fire and loss. What they would become here, what he would become, was still unwritten. The air grew heavier, the heat more oppressive, as if hell itself sensed his thoughts. But Astaroth didn't flinch. He rose to his feet, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the rivers of fire met the sky of ash. The path forward was unclear, but he would walk it nonetheless. Hell had claimed them, but it would not define them. Not entirely. The scorched earth trembled under Astaroth's feet as he stood amidst the gathering. The atmosphere was thick, suffused with tension and unspoken questions. The fallen angels, once celestial beings of harmony and unity, now simmered with an undercurrent of rivalry and distrust. The divine order had shattered like fragile glass, and the shards were sharp, cutting into the bonds they once shared. Lucifer, towering and defiant, stood at the heart of the assembly. Though his radiance had dimmed, his presence was undeniable, a force that demanded attention, even here in the depths of hell. He raised his hand, and silence fell over the restless crowd. "This realm is ours," he proclaimed, his voice resonating through the fiery expanse. "But a kingdom without structure is chaos. We must rebuild. We must rise." There were murmurs of agreement, but they were laced with unease. Astaroth watched as Lucifer's eyes scanned the crowd, measuring and weighing each of them. They were no longer equals, bound by the shared light of heaven. Here, power would define worth, and hierarchy would dictate survival. The first to step forward was Beelzebub, his form twisted yet retaining an air of menace. "I will command the legions," he declared, his voice steady and firm. "I will forge an army that will make even the heavens tremble." Lucifer nodded, acknowledging the claim without challenge. Beelzebub had always been a strategist, his mind sharp and his resolve unshakable. The legions would follow him, for there was no other who commanded such respect in battle. Then came Azazel, his wings charred but his eyes burning with a feral intensity. "I will take the fires," he growled. "This land will be shaped by my hands, molded into a reflection of our defiance." Astaroth felt a pang of unease as Azazel spoke. There was something unrelenting in his words, a promise of destruction that went beyond rebellion. Yet Lucifer accepted his claim, his expression unreadable. One by one, others stepped forward, staking their place in this new order. Mammon claimed dominion over wealth, his greed unbridled even in hell. Asmodeus, with his serpentine grace, took the mantle of passion and desire, his smile a sharp contrast to the grim setting. And then there was Astaroth. He hesitated, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. In heaven, he had been a scholar, a seeker of wisdom. His place had been among the archives of divine knowledge, unraveling mysteries and crafting truths. But here, in this desolate inferno, that identity felt like a distant echo. "Astaroth," Lucifer called, his voice cutting through the haze of doubt. "What will you claim?" All eyes turned to him, their gazes heavy with expectation. He stepped forward, his wings trailing smoke, and met Lucifer's gaze. "I will take the mines," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "I will hold dominion over knowledge, over thought. In this place, where chaos reigns, understanding will be my weapon." There was a murmur among the crowd, a mixture of approval and skepticism. Lucifer tilted his head, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Very well," he said. "The mines will be yours." With the hierarchy taking shape, the tension in the air began to shift. The fallen angels moved, forming alliances and marking territories, their actions driven by ambition and survival. Astaroth watched as the once unified host fractured further, their bonds unraveling into a web of power and manipulation. Yet even as he claimed his domain, he felt the weight of his decision settle on him. Knowledge, in this infernal realm, would not be pure or untainted. It would be a tool, a weapon to wield against others and himself. He withdrew from the gathering, seeking solitude amidst the desolation. The air around him buzzed with the energy of the newly formed order, a chaotic symphony of voices and power. But Astaroth's thoughts were elsewhere, turning over the implications of what had just transpired. The hierarchy was set, but it was far from stable. Each claim, each domain, was a potential source of conflict. Loyalties were thin and easily severed, and power was a fickle currency in this land of fire and ash. As he gazed out at the smoldering expanse of hell, Astaroth felt the first stirrings of unease. The hierarchy would bring structure, but it would also breed ambition, jealousy, and betrayal. And in this place, where every decision carried the weight of eternal consequence, there could be no room for error. The night, if such a thing could exist in hell, grew darker, the embers in the ground dimming to a faint glow. Astaroth remained still, his mind racing with possibilities and dangers. He had claimed his place in the hierarchy, but the true test was yet to come. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him even in the searing heat, that hell's new order would not remain unchallenged for long. Astaroth stood at the edge of a molten chasm, his gaze fixed on the searing expanse before him. His wings, now darkened and frayed, hung behind him like a shadow of what they once were. The air was heavy with ash, and the faint wails of the damned echoed from the depths. Yet his thoughts were not on the suffering around him. They were focused on his claim, knowledge, forbidden and boundless, a weapon and a curse that had chosen him as much as he had chosen it. From the moment he uttered his claim in Hell's first court, he had felt a pull, a call from the depths of the infernal realm. It was as though Hell itself recognized him as its keeper of secrets, its archivist of truths too dark for even the celestial realms to bear. He followed the call into the heart of the abyss, where the flames dimmed and the shadows grew thick, wrapping around him like a living shroud. The ground beneath his feet shifted, and before him rose a structure unlike any other in Hell. It was a spire of obsidian and bone, its surface carved with runes that glowed faintly with an eerie, greenish light. The Tower of Knowledge, as it would come to be known, seemed to hum with an energy that was ancient and otherworldly. Inside, the tower was an endless labyrinth of halls and chambers, each lined with shelves that stretched into the darkness above. The shelves were filled with tomes, scrolls, and relics, each pulsing with the energy of forbidden wisdom. Some contained truths about the nature of existence, fragments of divine knowledge that had been cast out along with the fallen. Others whispered dark secrets, tales of power and corruption that could twist the minds of those who dared to seek them. Astaroth moved through the tower, his steps echoing in the silence. The air here was different, still, heavy, and suffused with a sense of reverence. He reached out, his fingers brushing the spine of an ancient tome. The contact sent a shock through him, a flood of images and sensations that threatened to overwhelm his mind. He saw glimpses of creation, of worlds spinning into existence, of stars burning bright before collapsing into darkness. He heard the murmurs of celestial beings and the anguished cries of those who had dared to defy the divine. And beneath it all, he felt the presence of something vast and unknowable, a force that defied comprehension. The knowledge was intoxicating, but it was also dangerous. Astaroth knew that to hold it, to wield it, would require more than intellect. It would require strength, resilience, and the willingness to bear the weight of truths that could shatter the soul. The tower responded to his presence, its halls shifting and rearranging themselves as though alive. It seemed to sense his purpose, offering him the tools he needed to fulfill his role. Astaroth began to delve into the texts, his mind hungry for the wisdom they contained. He read of ancient rituals, of spells that could bend reality to his will. He uncovered the histories of the fallen, their stories of love, betrayal, and ambition. But the knowledge came with a cost. Each revelation carried with it a fragment of despair, a reminder of what had been lost. The more he learned, the more he understood the depth of his fall, the distance between what he was and what he had been. The other fallen came to him, drawn by the power of the tower. They sought his guidance, his insight into the mysteries that plagued them. Astaroth became a figure of reverence and fear, his wisdom both a beacon and a warning. He answered their questions, but he also guarded the deepest secrets, knowing that some truths were too dangerous to reveal. As the keeper of forbidden knowledge, Astaroth's influence grew. His role in Hell's hierarchy became clear, not as a warrior or a ruler, but as a custodian of the truths that no one else dared to hold. Yet with this power came isolation. The knowledge that connected him to the infinite also set him apart from those around him. And as he sat in the heart of the tower, surrounded by the weight of eons, Astaroth began to sense a deeper purpose. The forbidden knowledge was not just a tool, it was a key. A key to what, he could not yet say. But he felt its pull, an inexorable force that would not be denied. The tower whispered to him in the silence, its walls alive with secrets waiting to be uncovered. And in its depths, Astaroth knew, lay answers that would change everything. In the shadowed chambers of the Tower of Knowledge, the air itself seemed to vibrate with an ancient hum. Astaroth sat at the center of it all, surrounded by tomes that defied time and scrolls that whispered even when untouched. His domain was vast, but it was far from silent. The knowledge he had claimed spoke to him, not with words, but with a cadence that crept into his thoughts, weaving stories from the strands of eternity. The whispers were relentless. They came as faint murmurs, brushing against the edges of his consciousness, tugging at him in moments of stillness. At first, they were indistinct, an unintelligible cacophony of voices layered over one another. But as Astaroth immersed himself deeper into the tower's secrets, they began to sharpen, their tones varying with each revelation. Some were soft and lilting, like forgotten lullabies from long-lost worlds. Others were harsh and guttural, carrying the weight of curses uttered in the final breaths of the damned. Yet, beneath them all was a single, unyielding thread, a call from across the ages, beckoning Astaroth to listen. It started with a relic. A small, unassuming shard of obsidian tucked away on an unmarked shelf. The moment Astaroth touched it, his vision swam, and the tower dissolved around him. He found himself standing on the edge of a great abyss, staring into the swirling void of creation. From the void came voices, overlapping and endless. They spoke of the first sparks of existence, of the birth of stars and the shaping of worlds. Astaroth's grip tightened on the shard as the voices grew louder, more insistent. They carried with them an urgency, a desperation that gnawed at him. "Do you hear us?" the voices seemed to ask, their tones piercing and mournful. Astaroth didn't respond, but his silence was answer enough. The voices surged, unraveling tales of forgotten eras and lost civilizations. He saw glimpses of towering cities swallowed by time, their spires crumbling into dust. He felt the sorrow of beings who had once thrived, their names erased from the annals of existence. And then came the warnings. The whispers shifted, growing darker and more foreboding. They spoke of betrayals and catastrophes, of cycles repeating across eternity. They spoke of choices made in arrogance and the cost of unchecked ambition. Astaroth felt their weight press down on him, each revelation a fragment of a truth too vast to fully comprehend. The voices did not merely recount history, they revealed its scars. They pulled Astaroth into moments of profound despair and unyielding hope, forcing him to confront the fragility of existence. He felt the agony of angels as they fell, their cries piercing the heavens. He felt the defiance of mortals who dared to challenge fate, their resistance echoing through time. And always, beneath the torrent of voices, was a question, one that resonated deep within Astaroth's soul. Was this his purpose? To be the vessel for these whispers, the keeper of truths too burdensome for others to bear? The voices did not relent. They spoke of the present, of the shifting tides of Hell's hierarchy and the fragile balance that held the fallen together. They hinted at unrest, at alliances forming and unraveling in the shadows. Astaroth could see it clearly now, the whispers were not confined to the past. They reached into the now, weaving threads of possibility and consequence. But it was the future that haunted him most. The voices hinted at a reckoning, a moment when the knowledge he guarded would become both a blessing and a curse. They warned of choices he would have to make, choices that would ripple across time and space. As the whispers subsided, Astaroth found himself back in the tower, the shard of obsidian still in his hand. He stared at it, his mind racing with the weight of what he had just experienced. The whispers had given him insight, but they had also left him with questions that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. The voices were a constant reminder that knowledge was not static. It moved, it lived, it breathed. It carried with it the voices of those who had come before and those who would come after. And Astaroth, the keeper of forbidden knowledge, was bound to it, his existence intertwined with its ceaseless flow. The tower grew silent once more, but the echoes of the whispers lingered in the air. Astaroth rose, his steps heavy as he moved deeper into the labyrinth. The whispers had shown him the fragility of time, the interconnectedness of all things. And though he could not yet see the full picture, he knew the answers lay ahead, waiting in the shadows. But the whispers were patient. They would wait. And Astaroth, burdened yet driven, would continue to listen. The air in the darkened chamber was thick, oppressive, as though the very walls held their breath in anticipation. Astaroth stood motionless, his shadow cast long by the flickering light of the summoner's circle etched into the stone floor. It was a crude yet potent design, pulsating with power drawn from forbidden rites. Mortals always underestimated the reach of their audacity, and this one was no exception. The summoner, a frail figure cloaked in tattered robes, knelt at the circle's edge. His voice quivered as he chanted in a tongue long forgotten by humanity, the syllables sharp and jagged, cutting through the stagnant air like shards of glass. Beads of sweat rolled down his pale face, pooling at the base of his trembling hands. He was young, perhaps no more than 20 summers, but his eyes bore the haunted look of someone who had seen too much, or sought to see far more than was his due. As the final syllable left his lips, the room fell silent, the oppressive stillness broken only by the faint crackle of energy emanating from the circle. Astaroth allowed the mortal to feel his presence before he made himself visible. It was a calculated cruelty, a moment to let the weight of what the young man had called upon settle into his fragile mind. When Astaroth appeared, it was not in his full form, but in a guise that struck a balance between majesty and menace. His once radiant wings were now dark, the feathers tinged with an eerie glow. His eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the summoner's very soul, and his voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble that reverberated through the chamber. "You dare call me forth?" Astaroth's tone was measured, but there was an edge to it, a dangerous undercurrent that made the summoner flinch. The young man bowed his head, his lips moving soundlessly before he found the courage to speak. "I seek your knowledge, Great One. I have studied the texts, performed the rites. I offer my soul in exchange for—" "Your soul?" Astaroth interrupted, a bitter laugh escaping him. "Do you think your soul is worth the knowledge you seek? Mortals have no concept of value. What is it you truly desire, child? Speak plainly, and perhaps I will indulge your foolishness." The summoner hesitated, his hands clenching into fists. "Power," he said finally, his voice trembling but resolute. "I want power to change my fate. To rise above those who have wronged me. To be more than this wretched existence." Astaroth regarded him in silence, his expression unreadable. The request was a common one: power, revenge, control. Mortals were predictable in their desires, always seeking to bend the world to their will, never understanding the weight of what they sought. "You offer me your soul," Astaroth said slowly, "yet you do not grasp what that means. To give your soul is to give all that you are, all that you could be. Are you prepared to lose yourself entirely for a fleeting taste of power?" The summoner's breath hitched, but he did not waver. "Yes," he whispered. Astaroth stepped closer, the energy of the circle flickering wildly as he breached its edge. The summoner gasped, the fragile barrier meant to protect him dissolving in an instant. Astaroth loomed over him, his voice a whisper that cut deeper than any shout. "Then let us seal your fate," he said, extending a hand. The summoner hesitated only a moment before reaching out, his fingers brushing Astaroth's. The contact sent a jolt through him, a searing pain that made him cry out, but he did not pull away. Astaroth's grip tightened, and the room was filled with a blinding light as the pact was forged. Images flooded the summoner's mind, visions of the power he would wield, of the devastation he could unleash. But intertwined with these were glimpses of the price he would pay. He saw himself aging prematurely, his body wasting away as the power consumed him. He saw the faces of those he loved, twisted in anguish as they bore the consequences of his choices. And he saw Astaroth, ever present, a silent witness to his descent. When the light faded, the summoner collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. Astaroth stood over him, his expression unreadable. "You have what you asked for," he said. "Do not forget that you asked for it." As Astaroth began to fade, the summoner called out, his voice weak but desperate. "Wait! Will I see you again?" Astaroth paused, his form flickering like a dying flame. "You will see me," he said, his voice carrying a finality that sent a chill through the room. "When the time comes to collect what is mine." And with that, he was gone, leaving the summoner alone in the darkness, the weight of his choice settling upon him like a shroud. The pact had been made, the threads of fate woven tighter. Somewhere in the distance, the whispers of forbidden knowledge stirred, as if laughing softly at yet another mortal who had dared to play with forces beyond their comprehension. The world had grown quiet, the echoes of ancient times fading into obscurity as humanity began to rise from the cradle of its infancy. Yet in that silence, there were whispers, faint and insidious, guiding those bold enough to listen. These whispers came from the shadows, threading through the dreams of men and women who yearned for more than the meager lives the mortal plane offered. It was in this liminal space, between yearning and the unknowable, that Astaroth began his work. He watched from the depths, his gaze piercing the veil that separated his realm from the fragile, chaotic world above. Humans were intriguing in their contradictions, fragile yet resilient, ignorant yet insatiably curious. Astaroth recognized in them a spark, a potential that could be kindled into brilliance or doom. It was not love that drove him to intervene, nor mercy, but a calculated interest. In mortals, he saw tools to reshape the universe into something far beyond the Creator's static vision. The first was a woman named Liana, a healer in a remote village. She spent her days tending to the sick and her nights weeping over the one she couldn't save. Her heart burned with a quiet rage against the cruel indifference of life, a yearning to master forces that mocked her efforts. One fateful night, as Liana sat beneath the canopy of stars, her hands stained with the blood of yet another child she couldn't save, she heard it, a voice, deep and resonant, weaving itself into her thoughts. "Do you wish for power, Liana?" She froze, her breath catching in her throat. The voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. "I can give you the knowledge to heal beyond the limits of your mortal body," the voice continued. "But such gifts are never without cost." Her trembling lips formed a single question. "Who are you?" "I am Astaroth," came the reply, the name reverberating through her soul. "A keeper of truths hidden from the unworthy. You, Liana, have the heart to wield what others fear." Desperation outweighed caution, and Liana agreed. That night, her hands were no longer merely those of a healer but conduits for energies that had no name. Her touch became a balm for the gravest wounds, her breath a cure for the deadliest ailments. The villagers worshipped her as a saint, but they did not see what lay behind her haunted eyes, the knowledge that for every life she saved, a piece of her own soul unraveled. Across the sands of time, Astaroth appeared to others like Liana, drawn to the ones whose yearning burned brightest. There was Kale, a warrior broken in battle, who sought vengeance against those who had wronged him. Astaroth taught him the art of manipulating the elements, gifting him the power to summon storms and earthquakes. But each victory left Kale emptier, the cries of his enemies etched into his mind like scars. Then came Darius, a scholar consumed by his obsession with understanding the cosmos. He pored over ancient texts until his eyes bled, whispering prayers to gods who never answered. Astaroth found him on the brink of madness, offering him the forbidden equations to bend time and space. Darius, blinded by ambition, accepted without hesitation, not realizing that such knowledge would strip him of his humanity, leaving only a hollow shell. One by one, they came, the desperate, the broken, the insatiable. Astaroth wove their fates with the precision of a master craftsman, each pact forming another thread in the tapestry of his grand design. These first sorcerers were both revered and feared by their peers, their powers marking them as otherworldly. They became legends, their deeds immortalized in the hushed whispers of storytellers. But behind every tale of triumph lay the shadow of their pact, an unseen thread leading back to Astaroth. The sorcerer's powers grew, and with them came chaos. Villages burned, rivers dried up, and kingdoms crumbled under the weight of forces that no mortal was meant to wield. The Creator's light, once a beacon for the world, dimmed as the sorcerer's influence spread like a plague. Yet even amidst the destruction, Astaroth felt no remorse. The chaos was necessary, a crucible to forge the world into something stronger, something more malleable to his will. The mortals, however, began to notice the cost. Lyanna's once healing touch became a curse, draining the vitality of those she sought to save. Kael, consumed by his need for vengeance, unleashed storms so fierce they destroyed his homeland. Darius, lost in the void of his own making, vanished, his name remembered only as a cautionary tale. As their powers waned and their burdens grew, the sorcerers began to question the price they had paid. Some turned to prayer, begging for salvation from the Creator, but the heavens remained silent. Others sought out Astaroth, hoping to renegotiate their pacts, but he offered them no reprieve. "Knowledge is a weight you chose to bear," he told them. "There is no undoing what has been done." The world grew darker, the line between the mortal and the forbidden blurring into obscurity. Yet Astaroth remained ever watchful, his work far from complete. For every sorcerer who fell, another rose, drawn by the same whispers that had ensnared the first. And so the legacy of the first sorcerers endured, a reminder of the perilous allure of forbidden knowledge. The mortals, despite their suffering, never truly learned. Astaroth smiled at their folly, knowing that as long as there were those who yearned for more, his influence would never fade. The whispers continued, threading through time, waiting for the next soul bold enough, or desperate enough, to listen. The first embers of demonology sparked not in darkened crypts or blood-stained altars, but in the quiet desperation of those who sought power where none should tread. It was not born of sudden corruption but a gradual seduction, an unspoken agreement between mortal frailty and otherworldly temptation. In this grim ascent, Astaroth was both teacher and architect, weaving his influence through humanity's deepest fears and darkest ambitions. Demonology began as whispers in the night, a language older than the stars that found its way into the minds of scholars, mystics, and dreamers. These individuals were not evil by nature, they were seekers, burdened by unanswered prayers and the silence of a creator who seemed ever distant. When Astaroth spoke, it was not with force but with a subtlety that made his words feel like their own thoughts, their own revelations. The earliest practitioners did not call themselves demonologists, they were alchemists searching for the elixir of life, astrologers tracing the paths of celestial bodies, and priests experimenting with forbidden rites to draw closer to the divine. It was in their experiments, their reckless curiosity, that the boundaries between the physical and the infernal began to blur. Astaroth guided their hands, offering fragments of his vast knowledge, enough to tantalize but never to satisfy. A scribe named Loria was among the first to codify these practices. She worked in secret, documenting rituals and incantations that promised to summon unseen forces. Her writings were meticulous, filled with diagrams and chants that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Loria was not driven by malice but by a profound sense of justice. Her village had been ravaged by famine, and she believed that these rituals could invoke a power to protect her people. But the entity she summoned demanded a price she had not anticipated. Crops grew, but the soil turned black and barren, the earth poisoned by the very magic she had called forth. Loria's texts, bound in human skin and inked in blood, survived her tragic end, passed from hand to trembling hand. Her work became the foundation of what would later be called demonology, a discipline steeped in sacrifice and ambition. Those who followed her writings quickly realized that these powers were not benevolent. They required not faith but submission, not worship but transactions. Astaroth smiled upon this development, for it aligned perfectly with his designs. He did not need blind devotion, he needed participants in his cosmic rebellion. As the practice spread, so too did the tales of its consequences. There was Orin, a king whose lust for immortality led him to bargain with an infernal force. He ruled for centuries, his body preserved while his soul decayed into a husk of bitterness and paranoia. His kingdom became a wasteland, its people reduced to shadows of their former selves. And there was Althea, a healer who sought to end death itself, only to create monstrosities that defied nature, their screams echoing in the night. Despite the horrors, the allure of demonology grew. It was not merely the power that enticed, but the promise of answers to questions that had plagued humanity since its inception. What lay beyond death? Why did suffering exist? Could the universe be bent to human will? Astaroth's whispers offered tantalizing hints, leading practitioners deeper into the abyss with each question they dared to ask. The rise of demonology also birthed its opposition. Religious orders formed to combat what they saw as a plague upon the world, their doctrines filled with fire and fury. Yet even among the faithful, there were those who turned to demonology, rationalizing their actions as a means to an end. They sought to harness infernal powers to defeat their enemies, only to find themselves corrupted in the process. Astaroth, ever the observer, found this duality amusing. He watched as mortals fought over moral absolutes while unknowingly playing into his hands. The lines between good and evil, light and darkness, blurred until they were nearly indistinguishable. The more humanity sought to categorize and control the infernal, the more entrenched it became in their reality. Texts proliferated, each more dangerous than the last. The Codex Umbra, said to be penned by Astaroth himself, detailed rites so intricate and perilous that even the most seasoned practitioners often met grisly ends attempting them. The Book of Veils, stolen from a forgotten temple, promised to reveal the true names of demons, though its pages were said to induce madness. These tomes became prized possessions, hidden in the vaults of kings and the lairs of secret societies, their knowledge coveted yet feared. Demonology became a labyrinth, a field of study that offered no clear path and punished the careless. For every practitioner who rose to power, there were countless others who fell, consumed by the very forces they sought to control. Yet the failures did not deter humanity. They pressed on, driven by a need that transcended reason, a hunger that Astaroth had carefully cultivated. In the rise of demonology, Astaroth saw the fulfillment of his purpose. It was not just about power or rebellion, it was about reshaping the fabric of existence itself. Each summoning, each ritual, each soul lost to the infernal added another thread to the tapestry of his influence. The mortal world was no longer separate from his domain, it was becoming an extension of it, a place where his whispers echoed louder with each passing generation. The practice spread across continents, taking on new forms and names, but its essence remained the same, a bargain with forces beyond comprehension. Astaroth reveled in this, his laughter resonating through the void. The mortals thought they were using him, but in truth, they were his instruments, their ambitions fueling his designs. And still, the whispers continued, faint yet insistent, weaving their way into the hearts of those who dared to listen. The rise of demonology was not merely a chapter in history but a living, breathing force, a testament to humanity's endless capacity for both creation and destruction. Astaroth watched, ever patient, knowing that the story was far from over. Astaroth's name carried the weight of ancient times, yet it became something more, something darker, as the centuries passed. In the Abrahamic texts, his existence was altered, twisted, and his presence became a whisper of something terrible. He was no longer just a fallen being, a prince of the heavenly hosts, but a demon, bound by the expectations of those who sought to suppress his power. In the Old Testament, there were no clear references to Astaroth, not by name at least. But his influence lingered in the forms of the gods and idols that plagued the Israelites, particularly in the Canaanite deities. Astaroth was originally known as Ashtaroth in the Semitic traditions, associated with fertility, love, and the stars. Yet as time progressed, the name morphed. The ancient world did not fear love or fertility, but what love could turn into when twisted by corruption. Astaroth's very name became synonymous with deceit and darkness. As the Israelites came into contact with these foreign gods, Astaroth's once noble status fell to a different, more sinister interpretation. No longer was he a deity worshipped in gardens or temple grounds. Instead, his name became the Cursed One, the false god, the one whose whispers led nations astray. He was depicted as a deity who enticed with promises of power, but at the cost of one's soul. The shift came slowly, as all things do when history writes over memory. It was in the era of the Judges, when the Israelites found themselves ensnared by the cultures surrounding them, that Ashtaroth began to show up in the most peculiar of places, temples dedicated to idols that were often condemned by the faithful. His name appeared in the book of Judges as Ashtaroth, a goddess, or rather an idol of the Canaanites, one of the many pagan gods worshipped by the people who lived in the land before the Israelites. Ashtaroth was a counterpart to Baal, the storm god of the Canaanites. But she, unlike Baal, was not just a god of power. She was an alluring goddess, one whose very essence was tied to temptation and submission. It was through this, perhaps, that Ashtaroth was given a darker identity. No longer just an angel of beauty or celestial might, he became a figure of the abyss, with all the corruption and destruction that followed. It wasn't just in Canaanite temples where Ashtaroth's name was whispered. As Israel's kings waged wars against these false gods, they often found themselves succumbing to the allure of these idols. King Solomon, renowned for his wisdom, built temples to the gods of his foreign wives. And though he turned away from them in the end, the very act of building these shrines to Ashtaroth and Baal marked the king as a man who knew the dangers of such powers. These idols were not meant to be worshipped by the people of Israel. They were tools of temptation, used by Ashtaroth to pull even the most devout into his web. Ashtaroth's transition from a fallen angel to a demonic figure occurred over time, and the texts were vague in their portrayal of him. The name was often linked to other deities or forces of evil, but it was in later Christian texts, particularly in the grimoires of the Renaissance period, where his transformation was most vividly realized. In these writings, he was no longer a mere deceiver or a god of love and fertility. Instead, Ashtaroth became one of the princes of hell, a demonic being tied to the abyss, an embodiment of everything that turned the divine into something warped and malicious. The first real references to Ashtaroth as a demon come from Christian traditions. He appears as a member of the infernal hierarchy, one of the great dukes of hell. In the Lesser Key of Solomon and other grimoires, Ashtaroth is described as an immense, terrifying figure, often depicted riding a dragon and holding a serpent in one hand. His head was said to resemble that of a lion, his eyes glowing with an unnatural fire, his wings vast and black. But it was not only his appearance that made Ashtaroth an ominous force, it was his mind, his subtlety, and the power he wielded over human hearts. Ashtaroth, in these texts, is the embodiment of sloth and treachery. He was known to teach subjects in the art of secret knowledge, the forbidden knowledge that gnaws away at the mind, bending it towards despair and ruin. As a demon of the second hierarchy, he whispered to the hearts of kings and scholars alike, his teachings enticing them into bargains they would later regret. But it was not just knowledge that Ashtaroth gave. He promised power to those who called upon his name. In the Pseudomonarchia Daemonum, a 16th century grimoire, Ashtaroth is said to offer not only wisdom but great wealth and the ability to manipulate the elements. But as with all deals made with hell's servants, the price was steep. Ashtaroth's bargain was never truly for the good of the soul, it was a trap, one designed to lead mortals into eternal servitude. Even within the bounds of Christian eschatology, Ashtaroth plays a role that is both subtle and terrifying. He is not always portrayed as the leader of hell's legions. He is sometimes seen as a fallen angel, once exalted, now cast down for his pride and rebellion. But unlike Lucifer, who led the rebellion, Ashtaroth is seen as more of a seducer, a being who tempts humanity with the notion that they can control their own destiny, even as they fall into his grasp. His promises are empty, his words hollow, but his presence lingers like a shadow over every moment of doubt, every temptation to take the easier path. Ashtaroth's role in the Abrahamic texts, though varying in detail and form, always remained that of a corrupter. He is a figure tied to the very nature of rebellion, not just against God, but against the divine order of things. His fall was not just a fall from heaven, but a fall into the hearts of those who dared to listen to his whispers. And as the centuries wore on, Ashtaroth's image morphed, but his influence over humanity never waned. There's a darkness in the hearts of men, a hunger that no amount of riches, power, or love can ever fully satisfy. It's in this abyss of desires where Astaroth's name continues to echo, his whispers filling the cracks of human souls like a venomous wind. His name, once linked to divine authority and celestial beauty, had been twisted, just like the very sins he fed upon. In his fall, Astaroth found a new role, not merely an archangel lost, but a prince who would master the darkness within. He became intricately connected with the 7 deadly sins, each one serving as a doorway for his influence to reach into the hearts of those willing to listen. Lust. It is the first of the 7 deadly sins, an unquenchable flame that burns in the human heart. Astaroth, once a celestial being of beauty and allure, knows this temptation better than any. His very nature once held a grace that could captivate the divine and mortal alike, and now, in his demonic form, he uses that same allure to ensnare the souls of men and women. With his voice, smooth like silk, he beckons the lustful, promising them pleasures beyond their wildest imaginings. But like all of his gifts, they are fleeting, leaving only emptiness and regret in their wake. His power lies not in giving, but in taking, in turning love into something twisted, in transforming purity into something corrupted. Greed is the second sin, and it is here that Astaroth's influence truly thrives. The endless hunger for more, for what one cannot have, is a craving Astaroth understands deeply. His promises are never enough. He whispers to kings and peasants alike, telling them that they deserve more, that they should take more, because they are entitled to the wealth of the world. He watches as hearts grow dark with desire, eyes glinting with the need to own, to control. And every time a soul succumbs, Astaroth's power grows, for greed, in all its forms, leads to an insatiable thirst that can never be quenched. It devours and consumes, leaving nothing but emptiness in its wake, a void that only he, the great deceiver, can fill. Wrath, the third sin, is where Astaroth's touch becomes more violent, more vicious. He knows how to manipulate the anger that rages within the heart, pushing people to the edge of their limits, stirring up hatred until it bursts forth like a wildfire. He fills minds with rage, twisting every slight into a reason to strike out. His whispers are filled with venom, telling those who listen that their fury is justified, that their violence is deserved. Wrath is an easy sin to cultivate in the hearts of the broken and the betrayed, and Astaroth has no shortage of those willing to carry out his will. He revels in the destruction, in the chaos, in watching families torn apart, kingdoms fall, and friendships disintegrate under the weight of anger. In wrath, there is power, and Astaroth knows it. Sloth is the sin of inaction, of complacency, and it is in this weakness that Astaroth often thrives in the shadows. His whispers are soft, seductive, coaxing people to rest, to abandon their duties, to let the world pass them by. With sloth comes apathy, a refusal to change, a refusal to act. Astaroth's greatest weapon here is not force, but patience. He waits, planting the seed of laziness, and then watches as it grows. The slow, quiet pull into a life of quiet despair. It is in the stillness of sloth that Astaroth works his most subtle magic, lulling people into a false sense of security, until they find themselves trapped in a cage of their own making, unable to escape the prison they've built through their own inaction. Envy is the fifth sin, and it is perhaps the most bitter of all. Astaroth knows the power of envy all too well. It is a sickness of the soul, an insidious poison that eats away at a person from the inside. He whispers in the ears of those who have what others want, feeding their desires with the idea that they deserve more, that they deserve to take what they have. He sees the resentment in the hearts of the unfulfilled, and he fans the flames of jealousy, urging them to compare themselves to others, to covet what they do not possess. It is in this envy that he finds a truly dangerous power, the power to turn people against each other, to destroy friendships, relationships, and families. In envy, Astaroth's grasp tightens, and with it, the walls between people grow higher, stronger, and more unyielding. Pride is the sixth sin, and it is here that Astaroth's influence becomes most dangerous. Pride is the belief that one is above others, that one is untouchable, superior. And Astaroth feeds this belief with all the promises of power and greatness. He whispers to the mighty, to those who have ascended the ranks of society, telling them that they are chosen, that they are better, that they are the ones who should rule. In pride, Astaroth's corruption runs deep, for it is in the hearts of the proud that the greatest falls occur. Astaroth knows how to inflate egos, how to make people believe in their own invincibility until it is too late. The prideful, believing they have nothing to fear, often find themselves crumbling from within, as their very arrogance invites destruction. Finally, there is the sin of gluttony, an excess, a craving for more that goes beyond reason, beyond need. Astaroth's influence in gluttony is not just in the physical consumption of food, but in the insatiable desire for anything and everything that can be consumed. His whispers feed the hungers of men, women, and children alike, telling them to take, to devour, until they are no longer able to control their cravings. It is the endless cycle of excess, the unquenchable need that never leaves a person full. And as they gorge themselves on pleasure, wealth, or power, Astaroth watches as they spiral further into self-destruction. His satisfaction lies not in what is consumed, but in the void that it leaves behind. Astaroth knows the 7 deadly sins intimately. They are his weapons, his tools, and his domain. With each sin he cultivates, he gains more power, more influence, and the world around him grows darker. He doesn't just corrupt, he refines the sins, turning them into the very fabric of human existence. And as long as humanity continues to be vulnerable to these temptations, Astaroth will remain, hidden in the shadows, his whispers never far from reach. In the dark, shadowed halls of hell, where the air is thick with the weight of centuries-old sins and the scent of burning regret, a council sits, a gathering of the most powerful demons ever to walk the realms of the damned. These are the rulers of hell, not bound by any mortal understanding of right and wrong, but by the twisted laws of darkness, chaos, and power. They are a reflection of the very worst of creation, embodiments of corruption and torment. Astaroth, the fallen angel turned prince of demons, presides over them, a being of immense power and cunning, who commands respect, fear, and hatred in equal measure. His very presence at the head of this council is both a symbol of his might and a reminder of the fall from grace he once experienced. The room is silent as Astaroth takes his place, the echoes of his arrival vibrating through the stone walls. The air feels heavier, as if the weight of his authority has seeped into the very stones of hell itself. Around the darkened chamber, a collection of monstrous beings sits, each one representing a different aspect of the underworld. They are demons of untold strength and malice, their twisted faces reflecting the horrors they have inflicted upon the living and the damned alike. Yet despite their grotesque appearances, there is an unspoken reverence for Astaroth. He is their leader, their guide through the abyss, and the one who holds the keys to greater power. Lucifer, once the mightiest of all angels and now the ruler of hell itself, sits at Astaroth's right hand. Though their power is nearly equal, their relationship is not one of equals. Lucifer is the sovereign ruler of the damned, but Astaroth, ever ambitious, seeks not just to be a servant but to one day challenge Lucifer's reign. His quiet observations in the council, his strategic silence, are as dangerous as any of his actions. Lucifer, with all his fiery pride, understands this well. Beside Lucifer, the demon Asmodeus, the embodiment of lust, lingers. His body is a shape-shifting mass of sinful desires, an endless swirl of bodies writhing in agony and ecstasy. His laughter fills the room with a sickening sweetness, a reminder of the depth of his influence. He has seen the greatest of kings and queens fall, their hearts consumed by the darkest desires, and he is content. But there is a shift in his gaze as he looks at Astaroth. There is no love lost between them, for Astaroth's control over temptation and desire runs deeper than Asmodeus's own. Further down the table, Mammon, the demon of greed, watches with greedy eyes. His form is ever-changing, shifting between a man with a gilded crown and a grotesque monster who devours gold and precious stones. Mammon's hunger knows no bounds, and his obsession with wealth and power makes him dangerous even among demons. He understands the value of power and influence, and he has learned to bow to Astaroth's superior control over the damned souls who fuel their strength. Yet, Even Mammon's loyalty is fragile, held together by the belief that Astaroth, in time, will provide him with greater riches than Lucifer could ever offer. Then there is Belial, the demon of lies and deceit, whose face constantly shifts, never revealing its true form. He thrives in the webs of manipulation, in the secrets that whisper from the corners of existence. He has no true loyalty, only a love for chaos and confusion. He has danced through the ages, watching kingdoms fall and heroes crumble under the weight of their own illusions. His gaze is cold as he watches Astaroth, calculating his every move, weighing his future actions with the care of a strategist who knows that even the smallest shift in power could change the fate of the damned. And in the shadows, hidden beneath layers of dark magic, lurks the demon Leviathan, the embodiment of envy and despair. His presence is barely felt, yet his influence is profound, as his whispers poison the hearts of those in the council, feeding on their jealousy and discontent. Leviathan has no interest in the games of power and authority. Instead, he longs to see the destruction of those around him, the slow unraveling of alliances and the breaking of promises. His agenda is unclear, and in many ways, that is what makes him so dangerous. The council is a volatile mix of ambition, desire, and spite, each demon with their own agenda, but all of them are bound to Astaroth. The air crackles with unspoken tension, and beneath their feigned respect for each other lies a hunger for dominance. But Astaroth, the fallen angel turned master of demons, knows how to play the game better than any of them. His intelligence, his ability to manipulate and control, is unmatched, and even Lucifer, for all his pride, knows that Astaroth's mind is a labyrinth that only he can navigate. The fallen angel's schemes stretch far beyond hell, influencing the mortal world in ways none of the other demons can understand. Each council meeting is a battleground in itself, a contest for power, secrets, and favor. But as the demons gather, all eyes are on Astaroth. He is not just a member of this council, he is its heart. With every passing year, his grip on hell grows stronger, and the other demons begin to wonder if their leader's true ambitions are aimed higher than the realm of the damned. Would Astaroth seek to overthrow Lucifer? Would he dare to challenge the very fabric of creation? These questions linger in the air, unanswered, as Astaroth plays his part in the great game of darkness. For now, the council remains, but in the eyes of those who sit around the table, the truth is clear: Astaroth is not content with his place. He will rise, and when he does, nothing will be able to stop him from claiming what he believes is rightfully his. The fire crackled and hissed, sending embers into the air, as the crowd stood in a hushed, anxious silence. The scent of smoke and blood mingled with the cold wind that swept through the barren square. There, tied to the stake, a woman stood, her hands bound, her eyes defiant and unyielding. Her skin, pale from the lack of sunlight, seemed to glow under the oppressive weight of the dark sky. The tension in the air was thick, almost suffocating. The crowd that had gathered around her was not there out of sympathy or understanding, but driven by a deep, primal fear, fear of the unknown, fear of a power that seemed to transcend the earthly realm. She was accused of being a witch, a servant of dark forces, a wielder of forbidden knowledge. The whispers had spread like wildfire through the small village, and now she was to be burned alive, her life snuffed out in the most painful way imaginable, as a warning to all who dared defy the laws of the land. As the flames began to lick at the edges of the pile of dry wood beneath her, the woman's heart raced. But it was not with fear that her pulse quickened, it was with an overwhelming sense of clarity. She had known this moment would come. She had seen it in her dreams, felt it in the tremors of her bones. She had been marked long ago, not by some curse or spell, but by her very being, her knowledge, her abilities, the way the world around her seemed to bend and break under her touch. And now, in the final moments of her life, she would see the truth of her existence unfold before her eyes. A distant voice called out, the signal to begin the ritual. The crowd shifted uneasily, waiting for the flames to rise high and devour her whole. But before the fire could touch her, something strange began to happen. The woman, still bound to the stake, closed her eyes. A deep, resonant sound filled the air, a hum that vibrated through the earth itself. The wind began to howl, and the flames, for a fleeting moment, seemed to hesitate, as though they were afraid of what was about to come. A ripple passed through the crowd. Some of the onlookers stepped back, their faces pale, their eyes wide with terror. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. The witch, as they had called her, was not like the others they had burned before. There was something different about her, something ancient, powerful. It was as if, in that moment, she was more than just a woman. She was a force of nature, a conduit of forgotten powers, a being touched by the very hand of fate. And then, just as quickly as the moment had arrived, it was gone. The fire roared to life, its flames rushing toward her with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural. But still, she did not scream. Instead, a smile played on her lips, an enigmatic, knowing smile. She had embraced her fate, accepted it, for she knew that death was not the end. It was simply a beginning. As the flames reached her, her body disappeared, consumed by the fire. But her soul, her essence, lingered in the air, swirling in the smoke. For a brief moment, the crowd was left in stunned silence. They had witnessed something they could not comprehend. A witch, bound and condemned, had vanished before their very eyes. What was left behind was not just ashes, but a feeling that something beyond their understanding had occurred, something that would echo through their lives, their world, for years to come. The witch trials had begun long before the flames licked her skin, of course. They had started in the shadows, whispered behind closed doors, where fear and superstition festered. Men and women who were different, who had knowledge of herbs, of healing, of the old ways, these were the ones who were hunted, their lives shattered by the ignorance and paranoia of those who feared what they could not control. To be accused of witchcraft was to be condemned to a fate far worse than death. It was to be torn apart by a society that could not understand you, a society that saw in you nothing but danger, nothing but the specter of destruction. The witch trials were not just about burning bodies, they were about burning ideas, silencing voices that had the power to challenge the established order. They were about destroying the feminine, the intuitive, the sacred knowledge that had once been passed down through generations. The women who were accused of witchcraft were not simply victims of their time, they were symbols of a larger conflict, a conflict between those who sought to dominate and those who sought to heal, between those who feared the unknown and those who embraced it. And in the ashes of the witch trials, the stories of these women lived on, whispered in the corners of the world, in the dark forests, in the forgotten places where the old magic still thrived. They were not truly gone. No, they had simply transformed. For every flame that consumed a witch, 1,000 more fires were sparked in the hearts of those who believed, who understood the power that lay within them. The trials had not been the end of the witches. They were the beginning of something far greater, an awakening. And in the silence that followed the screams of those who perished, a new force was born. The witch trials had, in their cruelty and their madness, sown the seeds of rebellion, of strength. The witches would return, not as victims, but as warriors, as symbols of resilience. And their magic, their power, would rise again, not in fear, but in defiance. The world had only begun to understand the true cost of their destruction. The room was cold, the air thick with the weight of secrets. In the center, a dimly lit altar stood, its surface adorned with cryptic symbols and faded parchments. The flickering light from the candles cast long shadows on the walls, dancing like ghosts of forgotten knowledge. At the far end of the room, a figure hunched over a withered book, its pages yellowed with age, its leather cover cracked and worn. The silence was broken only by the quiet rustle of pages turning, each one revealing more of the ancient, forbidden text. The book, with its intricate symbols and powerful words, was not meant to be seen by mortal eyes. It held within it the essence of the forbidden arts, the knowledge that could bend the very fabric of reality itself. The figure, a scholar once respected for his wisdom, now found himself lost in a world that no longer held the same rules as the one he had known. The forbidden arts were more than just spells or rituals, they were the threads that wove together the very essence of life, death, and power. And those who sought to master them often found themselves consumed by their own hunger for control. As the scholar read, the words began to blur, the lines between what was real and what was imagined fading away. He could feel it, the power, pulsing from the pages, calling to him, urging him to understand, to command it. It was not just knowledge that the book offered, it was a gateway, a doorway to realms beyond the physical world, where demons and angels, spirits and gods, roamed freely, their power unchecked by the mortal realm. The forbidden arts were dangerous, a double-edged sword that promised both unimaginable power and certain destruction. Those who had practiced them before had vanished, their names erased from history, their legacies buried beneath layers of fear and superstition. The arts had been deemed too dangerous, too corrupting, and so they were hidden, lost to time and forgotten by all but a few who dared to seek them. The scholar knew the risks. He had read the warnings, heard the whispers of those who had fallen victim to the temptation of the arts. But the allure was undeniable. The desire for power, for knowledge, for control, these were human desires, timeless and all-consuming. And the forbidden arts promised to satisfy them in ways that no mortal magic could. As he reached for the book, his fingers trembling, a sudden chill swept through the room. The air grew heavy, charged with an unseen energy, as if the very walls were alive, watching, waiting. His heart raced, but his determination remained. He had come this far. He would not turn back now. The words on the pages began to glow, an eerie green light pulsing from the text. The symbols seemed to shift, rearranging themselves, becoming clearer, more distinct. A low hum filled the room, vibrating in his chest, in his bones. The power was here, in the book, within his reach. All he had to do was take it. With a deep breath, the scholar began to chant the incantations. His voice, weak at first, grew stronger as he spoke the ancient words, words that had not been uttered for centuries. The ground beneath him trembled, and the air grew thick with the scent of something ancient, something malevolent. For a moment, he hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his mind. But it was gone as quickly as it had come. The power was within his grasp. He could feel it, taste it. There was no turning back. The room seemed to collapse in on itself, the walls bending, the floor cracking open. From the shadows, figures began to emerge, cloaked in darkness, their eyes glowing with a fiery hunger. The scholar had unlocked the gateway, but he had not prepared for what would come through. The demons, the spirits, the entities of the forbidden arts, they were not mere legends. They were real, and they were hungry. As the first of the creatures stepped forward, its twisted, skeletal form bathed in the green glow of the book's power, the scholar's breath caught in his throat. He had opened the door to something far greater, far darker than he had ever imagined. And now, the price would be paid. The forbidden arts had promised power, but they had also demanded sacrifice. And in that moment, the scholar realized that he was no longer in control. He had become a puppet, his strings pulled by forces far beyond his comprehension. The creatures, the demons, the ancient beings of the forbidden arts, they had come to claim what was rightfully theirs. With each incantation he uttered, each word he spoke, the power grew, and the creatures advanced, their forms becoming clearer, more defined. The scholar's mind began to unravel as the weight of his actions bore down on him. The book had given him power, yes, but it had also bound him to the very forces he had sought to control. His vision blurred as the room spun, the walls closing in on him. The creatures, now fully formed, surrounded him, their eyes glowing with malice. He could feel their cold touch, their claws brushing against his skin, their whispers in his ears. The price had been paid, and there was no going back. The forbidden arts had consumed him, body and soul. They had promised power, but in the end, all they offered was destruction. The scholar had become nothing more than a vessel, a tool for the very forces he had sought to command. And as the darkness closed in around him, he realized that he was not the master of the arts. He was their servant. The book, still glowing with the power of the forbidden, lay open on the altar. And the room, once filled with the quiet hum of knowledge, was now silent. The scholar was gone, lost to the very forces he had tried to control. And the forbidden arts, still alive, still powerful, waited for the next soul foolish enough to seek them. The night had fallen with an almost unnatural quiet, the streets dimly lit by flickering lanterns that cast long shadows on the cobblestones. In the heart of the city, hidden from the prying eyes of the common folk, a small, crumbling building stood, its darkened windows betraying little of the activity within. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, a tension that vibrated in the air. The flickering glow of candles illuminated rows of dusty tomes and obscure relics, the remnants of a long-forgotten era. Here, in this secret chamber, a group of individuals gathered in silence, drawn together by a singular force, a force that would ignite the rebirth of an ancient, forbidden power. The occult, once buried beneath the weight of centuries of fear and persecution, was slowly beginning to resurface, like the flickering flame of a candle in the dark. The Renaissance, with its resurgence of knowledge and curiosity, had opened the door to a world of forgotten truths, truths that the Church and the authorities had long sought to suppress. The thirst for understanding, for mastery over the unknown, had driven many to search for answers in places where light seldom reached. And in the shadows, the occult stirred once more. Among the gathered individuals was a scholar, his face hidden beneath the hood of his cloak. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached for an ancient manuscript, its pages brittle with age. He could feel it, the power within those words, the potential for discovery. This was no ordinary text. It was a relic from an age long past, a time when the boundaries between the mortal and the divine had been blurred, when magic and knowledge were one and the same. The manuscript held secrets, secrets of the occult, of ancient rituals, of powers that could change the very fabric of reality. As the scholar opened the manuscript, the air seemed to grow colder, charged with an energy that hummed just beneath the surface. The words on the page were written in a language that had not been spoken in centuries, a language known only to those who dared to venture into the realms of the unknown. With each word he read, the scholar could feel his mind expanding, stretching beyond the confines of earthly limitations. The knowledge was intoxicating, an elixir that promised to unlock doors to realms unseen, to grant powers that could reshape the world. But as he read further, a sense of unease began to creep into his heart. The knowledge was dangerous, too dangerous to be wielded lightly. The occult was not simply a tool to be used, it was a force to be reckoned with, a force that demanded respect and caution. The scholar knew that, but the temptation of power was strong, and the allure of the forbidden was difficult to resist. The candles flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as the room seemed to close in around him. The voices of the others in the room faded into the background, their murmurs a distant hum. The scholar was no longer aware of them. His focus was entirely on the manuscript, on the ancient words that seemed to call to him, urging him to continue. A soft rustling of parchment, a shift in the atmosphere, he looked up. The others were watching him now, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of curiosity and hunger. They too felt it, the pull of the occult, the desire to unlock its power. They had all come here for the same reason, to delve into the mysteries that had been hidden for so long. But now, with the knowledge laid before them, they could feel the weight of what they were about to awaken. The occult was not a path to be taken lightly, and they all knew it. The scholar closed the manuscript, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that what they had found could change everything. The Renaissance had ushered in a new era of exploration and discovery, and now, the occult was ready to rise from the ashes of history. The knowledge that had once been forbidden, cast aside by the hands of those in power, was now within their grasp. The veil between the known and the unknown was thin, and they stood on the precipice of something far greater than they could comprehend. Outside, the moon hung heavy in the sky, casting a pale light over the world. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the air thick with the weight of history and possibility. In that small, hidden room, the group of seekers gathered, their fates entwined by the secrets of the occult. They had opened a door, and there was no turning back. The Renaissance had brought with it a revival of art, science, and knowledge, but it had also awakened something far more ancient and powerful, the occult. The forbidden arts, once shrouded in darkness and fear, were now beginning to be embraced once more, like a flame rekindled in the night. And those who sought to harness its power would soon learn that the price of such knowledge was steep. There was no way to control the forces they had unleashed. The occult, like the flame, could both illuminate and consume. In the stillness of that hidden room, the scholar's mind raced with the possibilities, the dangers, and the promises of the occult. He had taken the first step, and now there was no turning back. The Renaissance had birthed a new age of enlightenment, but in the shadows, the occult had been reborn, its power ready to be claimed by those brave, or foolish, enough to seek it. The shadows of ancient legends are never truly gone, but instead, they take on new forms, slinking quietly through the corridors of art and literature. In the dim corners of centuries past, Astaroth, one of the most feared and enigmatic fallen angels, crept from the pages of religious texts and into the brushes of painters, the quills of writers, and the very fabric of myth. Over time, this ancient figure transformed into more than just a demon. He became an idea, a symbol of human temptation, pride, and the perpetual dance between the divine and the damned. The first traces of Astaroth in the world of art can be found in the intricate, heavily detailed manuscripts of medieval Europe. Here, in the margins of illuminated texts, the faintest outlines of Astaroth began to take shape. No longer a mere name in dusty scrolls, Astaroth became a creature with wings of flame and eyes that burned like the depths of hell. Artists, perhaps instinctively, depicted him as a majestic, terrifying being, beautiful yet sinister, an angel fallen from grace yet still holding onto the echoes of his former divinity. In the hands of the painters and sculptors of the Renaissance, Astaroth's image evolved. Where once he had been a vague presence in the shadows, he now appeared in grand, larger-than-life forms. He was painted as a regal demon, often shown holding a scepter or a book, symbols of both authority and forbidden knowledge. Artists like Hieronymus Bosch, known for his vivid depictions of the otherworldly and the grotesque, painted scenes in which Astaroth seemed to tower over humanity, a figure of both fear and fascination. In Bosch's works, Astaroth was a reminder of humanity's frailty in the face of a much darker, more powerful force. But it wasn't just the painters who were captivated by Astaroth's myth. The literary world, too, found in Astaroth an archetype of the darker aspects of the human soul. Writers of the Baroque and Romantic eras, such as John Milton in his Paradise Lost, took the seeds planted in religious texts and expanded upon them, transforming Astaroth into more than just a fallen angel. Milton's Satan, embodied by Astaroth in some interpretations, was not merely an evil creature, he was a tragic hero, a fallen god who had lost his place in the heavens yet still harbored a burning desire for power and revenge. It was in this light that Astaroth was reshaped from a mere demon to a symbol of defiance against a higher, often tyrannical power. During the Enlightenment and beyond, Astaroth continued to appear in literature, particularly in works that questioned the nature of good and evil, the divine and the damned. Astaroth was now an embodiment of forbidden knowledge, a temptress who offered to reveal the universe's hidden truths to those willing to pay the price. Writers like Goethe, in his Faust, drew heavily from these darker sources, casting Astaroth's essence in the form of Mephistopheles, the devil's right hand. Here, Astaroth was the embodiment of temptation, offering power and knowledge to Faust, just as he had tempted many throughout history. The spirit of Astaroth, despite being transformed through the ages, remained constant. He was a figure who blurred the line between good and evil, making humans question whether their desires could be trusted, or if they were merely pawns in a much grander, more terrifying game. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, Astaroth's presence in art and literature only grew more intense. Surrealists and occultists, eager to explore the fringes of the human psyche and spiritual realms, revived the ancient demon in their works. Artists such as Gustave Doré and later, in the dark corners of occult books and writings, illustrated Astaroth in even more grotesque and otherworldly forms. In these depictions, he was no longer just a beautiful angelic figure. Instead, Astaroth was a creature of pure chaos, a being whose very essence seemed to warp the world around him. His face was twisted into unnatural expressions, his eyes burning with an unearthly light, and his wings, now a mixture of fire and shadow, seemed to draw the very air out of the room. The 20th century saw Astaroth enter into the world of pulp horror and fantasy literature, where his allure as a demon of knowledge and destruction captured the imaginations of authors and artists alike. His appearances in works by authors like H.P. Lovecraft, whose stories often involved cosmic horror and forbidden knowledge, painted Astaroth as one of the primordial forces of evil, an ancient being who had witnessed the birth and fall of worlds. Astaroth, in these works, was the embodiment of the darkness lurking beneath the surface of human existence, a force that could shatter not only the physical world but the very minds of those who dared to understand it. His appearances were no longer just as a figure of mythology. He became a metaphor for the inner torment, the struggle for dominance, and the yearning for something beyond human understanding. Even in contemporary art, Astaroth remains a figure that continues to haunt the darker side of human imagination. In the world of modern horror, fantasy, and even video games, Astaroth's name still carries weight, and his character is often invoked as a symbol of ultimate power, corruption, and rebellion. His form has morphed, sometimes into something less human and more monstrous, but the essence remains the same. He is the embodiment of everything that is tempting, dangerous, and forbidden, an eternal figure who has remained at the fringes of human consciousness for centuries. Through centuries of art, literature, and imagination, Astaroth has evolved from a mere name in religious texts to a symbol of profound mystery and fear. He is a creature who transcends his origins, moving beyond the boundaries of theology and into the very heart of human desire, corruption, and rebellion. As long as humanity seeks to understand the unknown, Astaroth will remain a figure of fascination, his image changing, but always evoking the same mixture of dread and desire. The myth of Astaroth is not just a tale of a fallen angel, it is a mirror, reflecting the darker, forbidden impulses within us all. As the 17th century drew to a close and the Age of Reason began to take root, the world was undergoing a profound transformation. The once unshakable belief in the supernatural, in angels and demons, began to wane. The Enlightenment brought with it an era of skepticism, logic, and scientific inquiry, turning away from the medieval superstitions that had once ruled the hearts and minds of society. As minds opened to reason, the once feared figures like Astaroth, who had embodied temptation, evil, and forbidden knowledge, were no longer seen as threats to the human soul. Instead, they became relics of a bygone era, their power diminished and their symbolism twisted into something far less tangible. For centuries, Astaroth had been painted as a powerful demon, a force of darkness lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike at the hearts of the vulnerable. He had been the embodiment of sin, temptation, and corruption, a creature who whispered promises of forbidden knowledge to those willing to bargain with their souls. But as the Enlightenment era began to unfold, this worldview, one where demons could control the fate of humanity, began to crumble. The rise of reason, scientific discovery, and humanism led people to question long-held beliefs, including the existence of such demons. The supernatural was no longer seen as an undeniable truth, but as something to be explained away by logic and reason. It was in this shifting landscape that Astaroth's place in the collective consciousness began to change. As the fear of the supernatural diminished, so too did his role as a figure of real terror. No longer was he a demon to be feared and avoided. Instead, he became a symbol, one that reflected the growing tension between faith and reason, the sacred and the profane. Astaroth, like so many other dark figures, was now viewed through the lens of human psychology, social fear, and philosophical debate rather than as a tangible, malevolent force. In the intellectual salons of Europe, where ideas about human nature and the universe were being passionately debated, Astaroth's name began to be associated less with fear and more with the idea of rebellion. The Enlightenment thinkers, many of whom rejected traditional religious dogma, began to see in Astaroth a symbol of defiance against authority. Here was a fallen angel who had cast off the chains of divine rule, a being who had rebelled against God's design in search of personal freedom. For these thinkers, Astaroth represented the human desire to break free from the restrictions imposed by religious institutions, an allegory for the fight against tyranny, whether in the form of monarchy, church, or tradition. Yet, this newfound interpretation of Astaroth was not one of outright admiration. Instead, he was now seen as a tragic figure, one who had lost everything in his pursuit of knowledge and power. He was a warning, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the consequences of defying the natural order. While his rebellion might have been admired in some intellectual circles, it was also seen as a tragic failure, a reminder of the perils of overstepping human boundaries. In literature, Astaroth's evolving symbolism was mirrored in the works of prominent authors of the time. Writers like Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who championed reason and the rights of man, drew upon the myth of the fallen angel as a metaphor for the human struggle against oppression. Astaroth, in these texts, was not a literal demon, but a figure of rebellion, one who fought for personal freedom but paid the ultimate price for his defiance. In this context, Astaroth became a tragic hero of sorts, embodying the Enlightenment ideal of individualism but also the inevitable downfall that came with it. Despite the Enlightenment's skepticism about the supernatural, Astaroth's presence in the cultural consciousness did not entirely fade away. The figure of the fallen angel remained a powerful symbol, though it had transformed. Astaroth was no longer an evil force to be feared, but a figure to be analyzed, dissected, and understood. He was both a product of the old world, a world steeped in mysticism and fear, and a symbol of the new world, a world built upon reason and rationality. The age of reason had brought with it a shift in perspective. The belief in demons had largely dissipated, but the human need for symbolic figures to embody complex emotions, ideas, and philosophical debates had only intensified. For the people of the Enlightenment, Astaroth was no longer an entity that threatened their souls, but a complex symbol of the human struggle against the forces that sought to control and define them. His rebellion, once seen as pure evil, was now a reflection of the human quest for knowledge, power, and freedom, even when such a quest led to destruction. It was in this new context that Astaroth's image took on a more nuanced form, no longer just a dark force, but a tragic reminder of the cost of ambition, the price of defiance, and the dangers of seeking knowledge that was not meant to be known. As time passed, Astaroth's transformation was not just confined to intellectual circles or literature. The shift in perception reflected a broader cultural change, a movement away from the mystical and the supernatural, and toward a world defined by human reason, scientific discovery, and the rejection of religious authority. In this new world, Astaroth was relegated to the shadows, a faint echo of a past belief system that no longer held the same power over the human psyche. Yet, even in this diminished state, his legacy endured, forever woven into the fabric of human thought as a symbol of the eternal tension between belief and skepticism, faith and reason. In the darkened corners of history, where whispers slip through the cracks of time, secret societies have flourished like hidden flames in the night. Their rise, often shadowed by the very secrecy that defined them, was not just a matter of survival but of power. They emerged from the ashes of forgotten conspiracies, born from a mix of rebellion, curiosity, and the human desire for control in a world that offered no guarantees. Their members were bound by oaths thicker than blood, by secrets so deep they could only be shared in the silence of the night. These were societies that thrived on the fringes, on the edge of law and order, on the cusp of the unknown, and they were led by those who had the audacity to dare what others would not. Astaroth, the fallen angel who once sought forbidden knowledge, would have been at home in the labyrinths of these societies. In fact, some of the most ancient and powerful secret organizations, those who dwelled in the shadows of history, were drawn to his name. His very essence, his rebellion, his quest for ultimate knowledge, his willingness to sacrifice everything for power, resonated with those who saw themselves as the true seekers of truth. And in the early days of these societies, when whispers of Astaroth's power still hung in the air, his name was invoked as both a symbol and a tool, a key to unlock the gates of forbidden wisdom. The 16th and 17th centuries, in particular, were marked by a surge of secret societies. The rise of the Freemasons, the Rosicrucians, and other clandestine orders brought with them a sense of mystery, of power that could not be seen but could be felt. These societies, often composed of men who were well versed in the occult, alchemy, and the ancient texts of forbidden knowledge, were drawn to the promise of something greater. The allure of hidden truths, of secrets guarded from the public eye, was too powerful to resist. Astaroth, in all his fallen glory, became the archetype of the knowledge they craved, unseen, untouchable, and dangerous. The appeal of secret societies was not just intellectual or philosophical, it was deeply personal. For many of their members, these societies offered an escape from the rigid constraints of society, a way to transcend the limitations of the material world. They sought a higher plane, a world where knowledge and power were not bound by the laws of men or the dogmas of religion. Astaroth, the fallen angel who had broken free from the divine order, was seen as a figure who represented the ultimate freedom, a freedom that could only be attained through the acquisition of forbidden knowledge. He became the perfect symbol for the men who would go to great lengths to protect their secrets, even if it meant delving into the darkest corners of the human soul. But as these societies grew in power, so too did the suspicion surrounding them. Rumors swirled about their true intentions. Were they truly seeking enlightenment, or were they plotting something far more sinister? The secrecy that shrouded them only deepened the mystery. In the minds of those outside these societies, they became the perfect breeding ground for conspiracy and paranoia. The very act of keeping secrets, of hiding in the shadows, was enough to inspire fear and distrust. And so, the rise of these societies was met with opposition from the forces that held the power in the open world, religious institutions, monarchies, and governments alike. The Church, in particular, saw the rise of these societies as a direct threat to its authority. The Church had long held dominion over knowledge and morality, and the idea that secret organizations were gathering power and knowledge in secret was seen as an affront to its control. It was in this context that the witch hunts and the Inquisition found fertile ground. The Church accused these secret societies of harboring heresies, of worshiping demons, and of practicing dark rituals. In some ways, these accusations were true. The members of these societies often embraced the occult, and some even saw their practices as a means to summon ancient, forgotten powers like Astaroth. But what was truly terrifying to the Church was the idea that these secret societies represented a challenge to its absolute power. They were no longer just dabbling in forbidden knowledge, they were creating their own systems of belief, their own rules and codes, outside the reach of the Church's influence. The members of these societies, like Astaroth, had broken away from the divine order in search of something more, something that the Church could not provide. This made them not just heretics, but enemies of the divine, and the Church sought to stamp them out. For the members of these societies, however, the risk was worth the reward. The promise of knowledge, of hidden truths that lay beyond the veil of the ordinary world, was too great to ignore. And so, they continued their practices in secret, gathering in hidden chambers, speaking in codes, and performing rituals that only a few could comprehend. The very secrecy of these societies made them more powerful, more alluring. They were not just searching for knowledge, they were building a new world, one that was free from the constraints of the old one. Astaroth's presence in these societies was more than symbolic. To some, he was a guide, a patron of those who dared to seek the forbidden. To others, he was a warning, a reminder of the price that must be paid for power. His name, whispered in the corners of darkened rooms, was both a blessing and a curse. The members of these societies, much like Astaroth, were forever caught between the desire for knowledge and the fear of the consequences that knowledge could bring. But no matter how far they ventured into the shadows, no matter how deep they dug into the mysteries of the universe, there was always one truth that they could not escape: the more they sought, the more they risked. Like Astaroth, who had once defied the heavens, these men had broken the chains that bound them to the world of the ordinary. They had embraced the unknown, but in doing so, they had also embraced the dangers that came with it. In the rise of secret societies, there was a hunger for something more, for something beyond the reach of ordinary men. And just as Astaroth had once sought to transcend the limitations of his existence, so too did these men. They were bound by secrets, by oaths, by knowledge that no one else could fathom. And as they delved deeper into the hidden realms of power, they could not help but wonder, what price would they pay for the secrets they sought? Would they, too, find themselves cast out into the darkness, like the fallen angel who had sought the very same knowledge centuries before? The dawn of the industrial age brought with it a world on the brink of change, a world that shifted so rapidly that even the most grounded souls struggled to find their footing. Factories rose from the earth like steel giants, puffing smoke into the skies, obscuring the sun. People flocked to cities, seeking work in the sprawling labyrinths of machinery. Life became a blur of noise, steel, and progress, and yet, in the shadows of this dazzling revolution, something darker began to stir. It was not just the smog that choked the air or the grinding of gears that echoed in the streets. It was the whisper of forgotten forces, of ancient powers that had once been hidden, now clawing their way back into the light. Astaroth, the fallen angel whose name had been whispered in the darkest corners of history, found himself once again becoming a symbol in this new era. The industrial age, with all its promises of progress and enlightenment, seemed to harbor a growing undercurrent of fear, a fear of what was being lost in the rush to build something new. It wasn't just the transformation of the world that stirred unease, it was the loss of connection to the old ways, to the mysteries that had once bound humanity to the earth, to the unseen forces that governed their fate. And in this world of machines, there was one name that echoed through the minds of those who still believed in the old magic, Astaroth. In the heart of the Industrial Revolution, there were those who saw the rapid changes not as an opportunity but as a threat, an erosion of everything that had once made the world sacred. The ancient, mystical knowledge that had been passed down through generations was now being drowned by the cacophony of machines. The world, it seemed, was losing its soul. And in this loss, Astaroth's image began to evolve. No longer just a rebellious angel or the keeper of forbidden knowledge, he became something far more potent, a symbol of resistance to the overwhelming tide of progress that threatened to erase the very essence of humanity. As factories grew and cities sprawled, the human spirit seemed to become more detached. People worked longer hours, their lives dictated by the clock, their every movement controlled by the relentless demands of the industrial machine. The shift from rural to urban life brought with it a sense of alienation, a disconnection from the natural world, from the rhythms of the earth. And in this disconnection, there was a deep, underlying fear. What would become of mankind when they had no connection to the mysteries of the old world, no understanding of the forces that had once shaped their lives? Astaroth, in the minds of some, was not just a fallen angel but a warning. He was a reflection of what happened when one turned away from the divine, when one pursued knowledge at any cost without understanding the consequences. The rise of scientific thought during the industrial age only added fuel to this fire. The age of reason, once thought to have ushered in a new era of enlightenment, began to clash violently with the old, supernatural beliefs that had once held sway. Astaroth, along with other figures of ancient lore, found themselves increasingly vilified by the growing dominance of reason and rationality. As machines replaced human hands and industry overtook tradition, the mysticism that had once been revered seemed like an ancient relic, a bygone era that had no place in the modern world. Yet, in the shadows of these sweeping changes, there were still those who clung to the old ways, who saw the Industrial Revolution not as a triumph, but as a tragedy. They gathered in secret, in the hidden corners of cities that pulsed with industry, speaking of the ancient powers that once governed the world. Astaroth became a figurehead for their rebellion, a reminder that the pursuit of power, of unchecked knowledge, could come at a terrible cost. His name was invoked not just as a symbol of defiance, but as a warning, a reminder that for every leap forward in progress, something was inevitably lost, something that could never be reclaimed. But it wasn't just the rebels, the mystics, or the outcasts who felt the pull of Astaroth in this age. The very industrialization that was seen by many as progress began to give birth to a new class of men who, like Astaroth, were willing to sacrifice everything in the pursuit of power. These men were the industrialists, the men who controlled the machines, the men who harnessed the forces of nature to build empires of steel and iron. They were the new gods of this world, their wealth and influence growing at a rate that had never been seen before. And in the pursuit of their own dominance, many of them began to lose sight of the very thing that had brought them to power, the human spirit. The factories that dotted the land became more than just places of work, they became prisons, places where men and women toiled away their lives in pursuit of a dream that was not their own. As they worked long hours, their bodies and minds dulled by the constant hum of machinery, they began to question what it all meant. Was this the future? Was this the price of progress? And in these questions, the name of Astaroth once again stirred in the hearts of those who had the courage to ask them. The fallen angel's image was no longer just that of a rebellious being cast out of heaven. He became something far more human, an embodiment of the dark side of ambition, of the desire for power and knowledge at any cost. The Industrial Age, with its unrelenting push forward, mirrored Astaroth's own fall from grace. The same hunger for power that had driven him to defy the divine now drove the industrialists to exploit every resource, every person, in their quest for dominance. In this way, Astaroth was not just a figure from an ancient past, but a mirror of the present, a reminder of what could happen when ambition became an obsession, when the price of progress was paid in human lives and lost souls. As the smokestacks rose and the cities grew, so too did the whispers. There were those who began to question whether humanity had truly advanced or whether it had simply traded one form of darkness for another. The Industrial Age, for all its promise, had cast a shadow over the world, and in that shadow, the name of Astaroth once again found a place. His story, his fall, his pursuit of forbidden knowledge, became the cautionary tale for a world that was losing its way. The very progress that was meant to elevate mankind was, in some ways, pushing them further from the divine, further from the mysteries that had once given life meaning. In the end, the shadow of the Industrial Age was not just a result of the smoke and steel that filled the skies. It was the shadow of Astaroth himself, the shadow of ambition unchecked, of knowledge pursued without wisdom. It was the shadow of a world that had lost its way, and in that darkness, Astaroth's name lived on, a reminder of what can happen when man dares to reach too far, to rise too high, without understanding the cost. The air grew heavy with an unsettling chill, a darkness creeping into the world as centuries unfolded. What had once been whispers in the corners of the earth, hidden in the forgotten crevices of human consciousness, began to rise. It wasn't the demons or the curses that frightened people most, it was the slowly shifting ideas, the promises of power that lured them into a new way of thinking. The age of Satanism had arrived, not with fire and brimstone, but with a creeping influence, one that would change everything, slowly and irrevocably. Astaroth, the fallen angel, whose name had once sent chills down the spines of those who dared to utter it, found his place in this age. The age of Satanism wasn't merely about worshiping the devil, it was about embracing what many saw as the antithesis of everything that had once been sacred. It was about power, defiance, and the rejection of divine authority. For some, Astaroth embodied these very ideals, a figure who defied the heavens, a symbol of rebellion, of casting aside the rules and limitations placed on mankind by a higher power. As the world entered this new era, there was a surge of interest in the occult and the esoteric. Satanism, once confined to the shadows, began to surface in more open forms. People turned to it not because they feared damnation, but because they sought something deeper, something beyond the constraints of conventional morality. Astaroth's name, long associated with forbidden knowledge and the twisting of divine law, became a beacon for those who sought to break free from the bonds of traditional faith. It wasn't just the act of worshiping the devil that drew them in, it was the allure of the unknown, the power that came with embracing a philosophy so radically different from the mainstream. Satanism offered a promise of personal freedom, freedom from guilt, from the constraints of sin, from the oppressive weight of religious dogma. Astaroth, once a symbol of the forbidden, now became a figurehead for those who yearned to break the chains of their upbringing, to challenge the world around them and seize control of their own fate. The rituals, the incantations, the books filled with dark secrets, these were no longer hidden in the shadows. They began to surface in public, in circles of intellectuals and artists, and the writings of those who sought to explore the forbidden. Astaroth was no longer just a distant, terrifying figure of ancient texts, he was now a part of a new, dangerous ideology. The philosophy of Satanism, far from being a singular belief system, became a patchwork of ideas that fused together defiance, self-empowerment, and the desire to transcend the human condition. What made Astaroth's presence in this age so chilling was the way in which he symbolized the breaking of boundaries, both in the spiritual and moral sense. His fall from grace had not been the end, but the beginning of a new era of thought. To some, he was the ultimate example of freedom. He had broken away from the heavenly order, rejected the divine will, and forged his own path. To those who embraced Satanism, this act of rebellion was not a sin, it was a triumph. Astaroth was the patron saint of defiance, the patron saint of those who sought to claim power by any means necessary. As the age of Satanism unfolded, the lines between good and evil began to blur. What had once been clear moral boundaries, defined by centuries of religious doctrine, were now being questioned, deconstructed, and remade. People no longer sought salvation or redemption. Instead, they sought control over their own destinies, the power to shape the world as they saw fit. Astaroth, in this context, was more than just a fallen angel. He was a symbol of empowerment, a reflection of humanity's deepest desires to break free from the chains of tradition and the expectations of the divine. But with this rise came inevitable consequences. The very ideals that drew people into the embrace of Satanism also began to twist and corrupt them. The search for personal power, the drive to defy the heavens, soon gave way to chaos and destruction. It wasn't just a philosophical movement, it became a way of life for those who adopted it. And like all things born of rebellion, it carried a dangerous price. The thirst for power often led to corruption, and the very freedom that had once seemed so appealing became a double-edged sword. In the darkness of the age of Satanism, Astaroth became more than just an intellectual figure. He became a catalyst for the worst in humanity. His teachings, twisted and distorted by those who sought to use them for personal gain, began to fester in the hearts of men. What had once been an act of defiance against a tyrannical system became an excuse for unchecked ambition, for cruelty and ruthlessness. The promises of power, of breaking free from divine law, slowly turned into something much darker. Astaroth's followers, in their quest for personal freedom, found themselves bound by the very forces they had once sought to control. As the years passed, Satanism became less about personal liberation and more about domination. What had started as a philosophical movement rooted in rebellion soon gave way to something far more sinister. The rituals, the invocations, and the symbols that had once represented a fight for freedom now served as tools for those who sought to impose their will on others. Astaroth, the fallen angel, became the face of this dark transformation, a symbol not of empowerment but of destruction. The world had entered an age where the lines between good and evil were no longer clear, where the very nature of existence itself was being questioned. In this age, Astaroth was no longer just a figure in ancient texts. He was a living, breathing force, one that lurked in the shadows of the human soul, feeding on the darkest impulses of mankind. The age of Satanism was not just a historical period, it was the birth of something far more dangerous, a reminder of how easily the human spirit could be led astray by the allure of power, by the promise of freedom without responsibility, by the whisper of forbidden knowledge that came at a terrible cost. And as the age of Satanism continued to spread, Astaroth's name remained etched into the hearts of those who walked this dark path. No longer just a fallen angel, he had become the symbol of the very forces that humanity could not control, the darkness within themselves, the hunger for power that would never be satisfied. His legacy, twisted and contorted, became a part of the fabric of this age, a dark thread woven into the very soul of mankind. In the quiet corners of modern occultism, where whispered rituals and forbidden symbols are exchanged in private circles, Astaroth's name has resurfaced with an eerie new significance. Once relegated to the pages of ancient grimoires and medieval witch trials, he now stands as a symbol not just of rebellion, but of personal empowerment and spiritual exploration in a world that has largely turned its back on the divine. Astaroth's presence in contemporary witchcraft, Wicca, and chaos magic is far from what one might expect. He is no longer just a demon to be feared, but a potent force to be reckoned with, a being whose wisdom and power are sought after by those who dare to venture beyond the boundaries of conventional spiritual practice. The modern occult revival, a movement that gained significant momentum in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, brought with it a reimagining of many ancient figures, including Astaroth. While many figures from the occult traditions have been reinterpreted as symbols of personal transformation, Astaroth's path has been particularly fascinating. In contemporary witchcraft and Wicca, where the focus often lies on balance, harmony, and nature, Astaroth is sometimes seen as a challenging, even contradictory force. He embodies knowledge, and with knowledge comes power, the power to shape reality, to break free from constraints, and to understand the hidden workings of the universe. In Wicca, where the principles of duality govern much of the belief system, light and dark, masculine and feminine, creation and destruction, Astaroth represents the dark side of divine energy, but not in the traditional sense of evil. Instead, he is viewed as the archetype of the transformative power of darkness. The darkness he embodies isn't about pure malevolence, but about the profound, sometimes painful growth that occurs when one confronts the unknown and sheds old limitations. To some, Astaroth's energy is viewed as an essential counterpart to the nurturing aspects of the divine, a reminder that growth and change often come through chaos and destruction, as much as they come through creation and balance. His place in chaos magic is perhaps even more pronounced. Chaos magic, a modern magical tradition that emphasizes personal experimentation and adaptability, has long embraced the idea that no fixed or rigid system can fully contain the forces at play in the universe. It's about flexibility, fluidity, and bending the rules to suit one's desires. In this framework, Astaroth is a fitting figure. He represents an embodiment of change, of bending and breaking the old laws, of mastering the self and the forces of nature in ways that others might find too dangerous or disruptive. He is not an alien force to be feared, but a source of raw, unbridled power to be used, shaped, and wielded by those who are willing to take on the mantle of mastery. Many practitioners of modern occultism see Astaroth as a patron of knowledge, but not just any knowledge. It is the kind of wisdom that doesn't come easily or without cost, the kind that forces the seeker to confront their own inner darkness and to understand the world as it truly is, without illusions. His role is not to comfort or placate, but to push one to the brink of their own limits. The dark secrets of the universe, of the self, of reality, and of the forces that govern existence are Astaroth's domain. He does not promise safety or tranquility, he promises only the opportunity to know, to evolve, and to transcend. As Astaroth's significance grows within contemporary witchcraft, Wicca, and chaos magic, so too does the range of his symbolic meanings. In witchcraft, Astaroth can be invoked during rituals aimed at self-discovery, shadow work, and empowerment. Those who seek to understand their true selves, to confront their own fears, and to embrace their darker sides, often find Astaroth a fitting guide. Unlike other figures, who may be seen as entirely benevolent or nurturing, Astaroth's influence is sharper, more incisive. He challenges those who work with him to strip away falsehoods and to see the world, and themselves, through a lens of raw truth. In Wicca, where balance and harmony are revered, Astaroth's presence may at first seem paradoxical. But his role is not that of a destructive force, he is, rather, a force of necessary transformation. The cycle of life is full of endings and beginnings, light and dark, growth and decay, and Astaroth embodies this cycle. In modern Wicca, where practitioners focus on the wheel of the year, Astaroth can be seen as a representation of the turning of the wheel, especially in those moments when it feels like everything is falling apart. In those dark, uncertain times, when the world feels heavy with change, Astaroth's energy can help guide a practitioner through the chaos, leading them toward the rebirth that always follows destruction. Chaos magicians, who reject rigid, dogmatic structures in favor of personal freedom, are perhaps most at home with Astaroth's energy. For them, magic is a tool to break free from the constraints of reality and to manifest their desires in ways that traditional magical systems might not allow. Astaroth, as a figure of rebellion and empowerment, is a perfect ally. He is the embodiment of breaking the rules, of forging one's own path, and of refusing to be tied down by any system that doesn't align with personal goals. In chaos magic, Astaroth's invocation is not just about power or knowledge, it is about the power to shape reality itself, but it's not just through rituals and incantations that Astaroth's influence is felt. In modern occultism, his significance also extends to the written word and the arts. Astaroth has long been a figure who fascinates poets, writers, and artists, who see in him a reflection of the forbidden, the hidden, and the unknowable. In literature, Astaroth has been portrayed as both a seducer and a scholar, a teacher and a tormentor. He is a figure who embodies the ambiguity of human desire, the tension between light and dark, and the power that comes from understanding the most uncomfortable truths. And so, as modern occultism continues to grow and evolve, Astaroth's presence becomes ever more significant. He is no longer just the demon of old, the figure to be feared or rejected. In witchcraft, Wicca, and chaos magic, he has been reimagined as a force for personal transformation, a teacher who guides those willing to confront their own shadows and embrace the darkest parts of their nature. His energy is not one of comfort, but of challenge. It's the kind of power that demands everything from those who seek it, but in return, it offers something far more precious than anything the world can give: true self-mastery. Astaroth's presence in modern pop culture serves as a striking reminder of how ancient myths and figures can evolve and remain relevant in the contemporary world. Though his origins lie deep in the esoteric and occult traditions, Astaroth has found a place in movies, games, and novels, where his portrayal often shifts between villainous figures and complex beings of power. In these realms, Astaroth's character serves as a bridge between the distant past and the present, keeping his myth alive and adapting it to fit new narratives. In the world of cinema, Astaroth's name may not always be at the forefront, but his influence is unmistakable. Movies exploring themes of demonology, the occult, and possession often weave elements of his story into their plots. He frequently appears as part of the pantheon of fallen angels, or as an embodiment of corruption and knowledge in films that delve into darker, supernatural themes. In some cases, he may be represented as a wise and manipulative figure, encouraging the protagonist to seek forbidden knowledge or make unholy pacts, while in others, he is portrayed as a malevolent entity bent on spreading chaos and destruction. His association with temptation and wisdom makes him a perfect candidate for the kind of roles that explore the tension between free will and fatalism, and this archetype continues to be explored in modern storytelling. Movies like The Exorcist or Constantine tap into the deep roots of demonology, where Astaroth's name occasionally surfaces, even if only in subtle allusions. His portrayal in these films speaks to the fascination with the hidden powers and forbidden forces of the world, bringing his figure to life through the conflict between good and evil. Though Astaroth is not always named directly, his essence, embodied in the demonology of these stories, often echoes his original role as a powerful and seductive force that tempts mortals into making dangerous choices. He may not always be the main antagonist, but his shadow looms large, a symbol of humanity's desire for power and the price it demands. In the world of video games, Astaroth's legacy thrives, particularly in titles that explore themes of dark magic, demons, and the supernatural. One of the most significant and direct representations of Astaroth in gaming comes from the Soul Calibur franchise, where he is depicted as a towering, monstrous figure with a tragic backstory. While this version of Astaroth is not an exact depiction of the demon from the occult traditions, the character retains aspects of Astaroth's symbolism, his strength, his destructive power, and his connection to dark forces. He is a warrior, much like his mythological counterpart, who is bound by fate and cursed to fight for eternity, reflecting themes of both destruction and the cyclical nature of power. In Soul Calibur, Astaroth's presence goes beyond his brute force. He is often portrayed as a tragic figure, manipulated by darker forces, a warrior who seeks a sense of purpose even in his endless battles. This depth of character, however indirect, adds a layer of complexity to Astaroth's traditional role as simply an evil demon. It highlights a recurring theme in pop culture, the idea that even beings like Astaroth, once seen as purely evil, have stories filled with anguish, confusion, and ultimately, the search for meaning. Games that present Astaroth as a tortured soul reflect the increasing interest in complex, morally gray characters in contemporary narratives. Astaroth also makes his way into video games with a more direct connection to the occult. In many role-playing games, RPGs, where players are often tasked with confronting supernatural entities and unraveling the mysteries of ancient worlds, Astaroth can appear as a boss or a powerful figure whose presence is both a challenge and an opportunity for the player. These games frequently draw from classic demonology and mythology, using Astaroth as a figure who represents the dangers of temptation, the pursuit of forbidden knowledge, and the risks of making dark pacts. In these games, Astaroth's influence can be seen in the complex decisions players must make. Should they seek power at the cost of their souls? Will they challenge the system, knowing the consequences could be fatal? He is often not just a villain to be defeated, but a complex antagonist whose goals align with the player's quest for power or knowledge. This reimagining of Astaroth serves as a vehicle for the exploration of darker themes, such as the consequences of seeking knowledge that one is not ready to handle. The myth of Astaroth also lives on in literature, particularly in novels that explore the occult, demonology, or supernatural themes. In works like the Inferno by Dante Alighieri, Astaroth's influence can be felt, even if his name is not directly invoked. The story of the fallen angels and their eternal punishment in hell echoes Astaroth's myth, even if it isn't a direct retelling. In modern horror novels, Astaroth's influence is still deeply embedded, often appearing as a character or an inspiration for demonic figures who challenge the protagonist's morality and beliefs. More recently, Astaroth has appeared in a variety of fantasy novels where he is sometimes portrayed as a demon who is less a straightforward antagonist and more a figure whose power and wisdom the protagonist must grapple with. In these novels, Astaroth's reputation as a teacher of forbidden knowledge is central to his role in the story. The temptation to make a pact with him is often the core conflict, with characters struggling with their desires for power, knowledge, and the inevitable consequences of such choices. Through these literary works, Astaroth's myth continues to thrive, offering readers a glimpse into a world where the pursuit of forbidden knowledge can either lead to enlightenment or despair. In these portrayals, Astaroth becomes less of a symbol of ultimate evil and more of a complex, multifaceted figure. He is a tempter, a teacher, a force that reveals the uncomfortable truths of the universe, and often, a tragic figure in his own right. Modern interpretations of Astaroth reflect a shifting cultural view of demons, from simple representations of evil to beings with deeper motivations, desires, and personalities. Even in a world where belief in the supernatural has waned, Astaroth's image continues to thrive in the imagination. His presence in movies, video games, and literature ensures that his myth remains alive, evolving, and relevant. What once was a figure of fear and dark knowledge has, in the modern world, become a symbol of the dangerous allure of power and the complexities of moral choices. As pop culture continues to evolve, Astaroth's story is far from over. His myth will continue to adapt, offering new interpretations and inspiring creators across all forms of media. In today's world, Astaroth's role in theological debates and academic discussions is marked by shifting interpretations and new perspectives. No longer just a figure from ancient demonology or occult traditions, Astaroth has entered the realm of scholarly discourse, provoking questions about the nature of evil, the intersection of religious belief and mythology, and the role of spiritual entities in human history. His name still evokes the complex relationship between faith, knowledge, and temptation, as well as the moral dilemmas posed by ancient texts and their modern reinterpretations. For centuries, Astaroth was mostly relegated to the darker corners of theology, considered a prime example of the fallen angels, those who rebelled against God and were cast into the pits of hell. His image as a demon, a prince of hell, and a seducer of mortals fit neatly into the broader Christian conception of evil as a supernatural force aiming to corrupt and destroy. He was often depicted in medieval texts as a being that offered wisdom in exchange for servitude, a deal that many believed led to spiritual ruin. The portrayal of Astaroth in the early church's teachings emphasized his role in encouraging idolatry, pride, and a dangerous thirst for forbidden knowledge. These teachings dominated the theological narrative for centuries, shaping the common understanding of Astaroth's nature. However, as the modern world evolved, so too did the lens through which theologians and scholars viewed Astaroth. In recent times, especially within academic circles that focus on religious studies, ancient texts, and comparative mythology, Astaroth has become more than just a symbol of evil. Some scholars argue that his role in religious thought should be examined in a broader context, not merely as a demonic figure, but as an archetype that reflects humanity's struggle with knowledge, morality, and the unknown. One aspect of this modern rethinking centers on the concept of Astaroth as a bringer of forbidden knowledge. Traditionally, the acquisition of knowledge has been a double-edged sword in theology. On one hand, wisdom and enlightenment are highly prized virtues in many religious traditions. On the other, the desire for knowledge can also lead to corruption and hubris, as seen in the biblical story of Adam and Eve. In this context, Astaroth's role as the keeper of forbidden wisdom represents the temptation to transcend human limitations and reach for something that is not meant for mortals. This duality is particularly evident in modern theological debates, where scholars wrestle with questions about the ethical implications of knowledge and the dangers of seeking power outside of divine boundaries. Some contemporary theologians interpret Astaroth's symbolism in a way that reflects humanity's constant yearning for understanding and mastery over the natural world. In a world where technological advancements, scientific discoveries, and philosophical movements continue to push the boundaries of human knowledge, Astaroth's myth may serve as a cautionary tale about the consequences of overstepping these boundaries. The temptation to gain knowledge at any cost resonates with modern concerns about the ethical and moral implications of scientific progress. For example, issues like genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and the exploration of outer space mirror the ancient fear that humanity might seek knowledge that leads to its downfall, much like Astaroth's supposed promise of power through forbidden wisdom. Yet, this reinterpretation of Astaroth isn't without its critics. More conservative religious scholars maintain the traditional view of Astaroth as a malevolent figure who must be rejected at all costs. These theologians argue that the modern world's fascination with reinterpreting demons and figures of evil can dilute the severity of their true nature. For them, Astaroth's role is unequivocally linked to the forces of sin and damnation, representing everything that stands in opposition to divine good. In this light, Astaroth becomes a symbol of spiritual corruption, a figure that must be eradicated from human consciousness in order to preserve purity of faith. Such debates highlight the tension between modernity and tradition, as some religious thinkers continue to uphold the more conservative, orthodox interpretations of figures like Astaroth, while others seek to explore these entities with greater nuance. Astaroth also plays a role in the evolving dialogue about the nature of evil itself. In modern theological discussions, evil is often seen not as a simple dichotomy between good and bad, but as a complex force that exists within all humans. Astaroth, in this light, can be viewed as a metaphor for the darker aspects of the human psyche, the desires for power, revenge, and control that must be confronted and overcome in the spiritual journey. This aligns with a growing movement in some religious traditions that emphasizes the importance of self-reflection and personal growth. Rather than viewing Astaroth as an external force of evil, some scholars argue that his symbolism may reflect the internal battles that people face within their own hearts and minds. Furthermore, Astaroth's depiction in modern theology also invites reflection on the relationship between religion and myth. In a world increasingly skeptical of traditional religious institutions, many see figures like Astaroth as representative of the mythic structures that shaped early theological narratives. His evolving role in contemporary discussions raises the question of whether myths, even those centered on demonic figures, might offer valuable insights into the human condition. Some scholars argue that Astaroth's presence in these discussions reflects the ongoing need for mythic stories to make sense of the chaos and uncertainty that exists in the world. Another area where Astaroth's influence is felt in modern theology is in the study of comparative religion. His character shares many similarities with deities and figures from other religious traditions who embody the tension between wisdom and temptation. Figures like Prometheus from Greek mythology or the serpent in the Garden of Eden story have similar roles, offering forbidden knowledge to humanity, with consequences that are both enlightening and destructive. Scholars studying Astaroth in this light often argue that his story mirrors the archetype of the trickster figure found in many cultures, a being who challenges the status quo and pushes humanity to question its assumptions about the world. These comparative studies open up new avenues for understanding Astaroth, not just as a singular figure of evil, but as part of a larger, universal pattern of mythological and theological archetypes. While Astaroth's presence in modern theological debates is often controversial, it also serves as a reminder of the enduring power of ancient myths to provoke new thinking. Whether viewed as a cautionary figure, a symbol of the dangers of knowledge, or a representation of the darker aspects of human nature, Astaroth remains a potent figure in contemporary discussions. His evolving role in religious thought reflects humanity's ongoing quest to understand the complexities of morality, knowledge, and the spiritual forces that shape our world. Astaroth, the name that often invokes fear and darkness, also carries with it a heavy whisper of something far older, something that once shone with divine brilliance. Beneath the layers of demonic corruption, the twisted forms and malevolent power, there remains a faint echo of the being Astaroth once was. The question that has been asked throughout centuries is whether, beneath all the chaos, there still exists the possibility of redemption for this fallen entity, once so closely aligned with the light. When Astaroth was first born in the celestial courts, there were no whispers of rebellion in his heart. He was a servant of the highest order, created with the very same divine breath that inspired the angels who watched over the heavens. In his early days, Astaroth was radiant, his wings vast, his countenance pure, and his purpose clear, to serve and honor the Creator. His intellect was beyond mortal comprehension, his wisdom vast and infinite. He was a being of great potential, loved and adored among the other celestial entities. The divine courts must have been proud of him, a symbol of what they could create in perfect harmony. Yet the core of Astaroth's story, his tragic descent from that place of glory, remains tied to one essential human trait: the need for understanding, the thirst for knowledge, the desire for power. These attributes are what led him to challenge the very fabric of existence, to question the nature of the divine order, and, eventually, to rebel. His fall was not a result of mindless anger or jealousy, but of a deep yearning to know the unfathomable, to understand the Creator in ways no one ever could. This drive, once so pure, was twisted, perverted by an overwhelming desire for control over the very forces that governed the universe. But within Astaroth, buried beneath the layers of his fallen form, there are still traces of the angel he once was. His intellect, which once brought him close to divine wisdom, remains, though now it is turned toward darker ends. His ability to perceive and understand remains, only now it feeds into the vast machinery of hell. His inherent sense of duty and desire to guide others, qualities that once made him a trusted servant, still flicker beneath the surface, though now they are used to lead souls into damnation. In the quiet moments, when Astaroth contemplates his own existence, there are whispers of the angel he was. For those who dare to look closely, it is evident that Astaroth's fall from grace was not a total severance from the light. The angelic core that once burned brightly within him still stirs, faint, but undeniable. It is the remnant of that part of him that once worshipped the Creator, that once believed in the goodness of creation. Could it be that even a being so twisted by darkness, so far removed from his divine origins, could somehow find redemption? Perhaps, within the stillness of eternity, Astaroth knows the answer. Perhaps he knows that no matter how far he has fallen, the spark of divinity within him can never be extinguished entirely. This thought, haunting and bittersweet, lingers within the recesses of his mind like a dream just out of reach. In moments of clarity, when the fog of his anger and pride recedes, he may remember a time when he felt the warmth of the Creator's love. He may recall the moment before the rebellion, when his wings were golden and his purpose was pure. The possibility of redemption, no matter how faint, must exist, for how else could something so magnificent ever be conceived in the first place? This is the paradox of Astaroth's existence. His potential for good, for redemption, has not vanished, but it is trapped within a being who has allowed darkness to define him. His role as a demon, as a prince of hell, is something he has chosen to embrace, but that does not erase the traces of his angelic nature. Even in the lowest pits of hell, where he resides as one of the fallen, Astaroth's angelic essence flickers like a flame on the verge of being extinguished, yearning for a return to the light. Perhaps the true tragedy of Astaroth lies not in his fall, but in the fact that he is forever caught between two worlds, the celestial and the infernal. There are moments when he may feel that redemption is possible, but just as quickly as that thought arises, it is smothered by his own pride, his own desire for power and knowledge. He knows that he is no longer the being he once was, and that realization is a double-edged sword. It is the awareness of his lost potential that makes him most dangerous, for it is this understanding that drives his manipulation of others, his attempts to corrupt and twist them to his will. But even within his deepest and darkest moments, there are glimmers of that divine light. He still has the capacity to feel remorse, to regret the choices that led him to where he is now. In the quietest hours, when all the sounds of the inferno fade into the background, he may wonder if there is a way back to the light. Could he, in some distant future, redeem himself and reclaim the grace he once knew? It is a question that haunts him, one that he may never be able to answer. For now, Astaroth continues his existence in the shadows, playing the role of the demon that he has been cast to be. Yet, the angel within him, no matter how hidden, will never fully disappear. And maybe, just maybe, in the distant future, when the world has changed and the ages have passed, there will be a chance for Astaroth to shed the skin of the demon and return to the angel he was meant to be. The possibility of redemption, no matter how remote, remains, even if it is only a whisper within the vast, unending night. Astaroth's mind, sharp and relentless, was never content with the simple laws of the infernal realm. He did not merely rule or torment, he thought. His mind was a labyrinth of questions and ideas, a constant torrent of reflections on the nature of good and evil, power and submission. In hell, where suffering and chaos thrived, Astaroth stood apart, not as a mindless force of destruction, but as the philosopher of the damned. While many of the fallen demons reveled in their newfound dominion over torment, embracing their roles in the eternal punishment of souls, Astaroth sought something deeper. He wondered, no, he obsessed, over the very nature of existence itself. What made one act virtuous or sinful? Was good and evil an inherent part of creation, or was it something forged by the hand of experience? He could not stop himself from questioning, even if those questions led to unsettling answers. As the grand architect of temptation and deception in hell, Astaroth began to see the world in a far more complex light than the other demons. He was not swayed by blind hatred, nor did he take joy in cruelty alone. For him, every soul that came to hell had a story, a reason for their fall. And within each fall, there was a lesson, a painful but essential piece of the puzzle. He began to view suffering not as a punishment, but as a tool. It was an opportunity to learn, to evolve, to understand the delicate balance between light and darkness, joy and despair. And so, as he observed the damned souls, Astaroth's thoughts turned inward. Was evil truly the opposite of good, or merely a shadow of it? Was sin nothing more than an act of rebellion, or did it stem from something far more fundamental, something woven into the very fabric of the universe itself? These questions, relentless in their pursuit of understanding, became his obsession. He found himself debating these ideas in the deep shadows of hell, alone with his thoughts, sometimes speaking them aloud as if the walls themselves might provide an answer. To Astaroth, hell was not merely a place of damnation. It was a stage for the grandest philosophical experiment ever conceived. He was, in his mind, a philosopher, a student of existence, and his teachings were the only thing that could save the tortured souls of hell from their eternal misery. But Astaroth was no teacher, and his musings were not offered in mercy. He wasn't trying to save anyone, he was just trying to understand. He pondered the idea of free will, an idea that, perhaps, existed more powerfully in hell than anywhere else. The damned, who had fallen from grace, still possessed the ability to choose. They had chosen their paths, after all, whether in defiance of God or out of ignorance. Astaroth reveled in this irony, his mind savoring the complexity of it. In hell, even the act of sin was a choice, a decision made by a will that was not wholly corrupted, a will that still had some remnants of the divine within it. But what did it mean for an entity like Astaroth, who was both the result of sin and the enforcer of it? What was his role in this grand play of fate? Was he, too, a victim of a cosmic error, an angel who was condemned to a life of endless philosophy and reflection? Or was his own existence a deliberate act of defiance, a rejection of the binary system of good and evil? The truth, to Astaroth, was never clear. The more he thought, the more the lines between good and evil blurred, leaving him to ponder 1,000 new questions without answers. He would often converse with other demons in the caverns of hell, offering them these unsettling thoughts, though most of them found little interest in such intellectual pursuits. To them, the art of suffering and domination was far more pleasurable than idle speculation. But for Astaroth, it was never enough to simply inflict pain. He could feel something more, something deeper beneath the surface. He often posed his musings to others, provoking them into conversations that left them uneasy. Was hell truly a punishment, or was it an eternal school for understanding the complexities of the universe? Was his role as tempter and torturer a necessary part of a grand design? And, more disturbingly, was it possible that even the fallen angels, the demons, could have a redemption beyond the fire and ash? His philosophical musings on good and evil did not always find receptive ears, but they didn't need to. Astaroth was beyond the need for approval or validation. His mind thrived in the realm of discomfort, of questioning, of uncertainty. And it was this ever-churning thought process that defined him, not as a mere demon, but as something far more tragic. For while his brethren delighted in the cruelty of their world, Astaroth's greatest torment was not the isolation of hell, but the endless, gnawing pursuit of understanding that could never be satisfied. The more he questioned, the more he discovered how little he truly knew. Every answer he found seemed to lead to 10 more questions, spiraling outwards in a chaotic web of paradox and contradiction. And yet, this was not a curse, but his gift, a gift that only Astaroth could fully comprehend. For in the depths of his despair, amid the dark questions that haunted his thoughts, he found a clarity that none of his fellow demons could claim. While they reveled in the blind power they wielded, Astaroth stood apart, the philosopher of hell, forever searching for the meaning behind the suffering and the evil that defined his world. Was it a curse to be the thinker in a realm of fire and brimstone? Was it a punishment to be burdened with such thoughts, while the others simply embraced their damnation? Perhaps. Or perhaps it was a greater punishment still, to be the only one who could see the world for what it truly was, and yet be utterly powerless to change it. Humanity has always been driven by the desire to know. It is a fire that burns within every heart, an insatiable hunger for knowledge, truth, and understanding. This desire is woven into the very fabric of existence, pushing humanity forward, creating empires, unraveling mysteries, and exploring the farthest reaches of the universe. But with knowledge, there comes a price Astaroth knows all too well. Astaroth, once an angel of heaven, now an embodiment of temptation and forbidden wisdom, stands as the harbinger of humanity's dual nature. He represents the paradox that knowledge can be both a gift and a curse, a blessing and a burden. The ancient stories that paint him as a demon of wisdom and understanding capture this complexity perfectly. He whispers secrets to those who are willing to listen, promises of power, of enlightenment, yet those who heed his call are often left broken, torn between what they've learned and the consequences of that knowledge. It is the story of humanity's relationship with knowledge itself, the endless pursuit of understanding, the yearning for insight that can push one to the brink of madness. Knowledge, as Astaroth embodies, is not just a tool for empowerment, but also a source of despair. To know too much, too deeply, is to risk losing one's grip on the very fabric of reality. It is to walk the razor's edge between enlightenment and insanity, between wisdom and folly. From the earliest days of humanity, there has always been an allure to forbidden knowledge. Just as Astaroth once stood in heaven, a being of light and wisdom, humans, too, sought to rise above their earthly bounds, to reach into the heavens and touch the divine. But the divine is not easily grasped, and for every leap toward it, there is a fall. This duality is as old as creation itself. The search for truth is not without its dangers. Humanity, like Astaroth, finds itself constantly teetering between wisdom and destruction, between enlightenment and the abyss. In the Garden of Eden, it was not just the serpent who tempted Eve with the fruit of knowledge. It was the very essence of that knowledge, the desire to transcend the limits of the human condition, to understand the mysteries of the universe, to be like gods. Astaroth's presence is felt in this moment, as he stands as the embodiment of the allure of forbidden knowledge, the seduction of learning something that should remain hidden. When Eve took the fruit, she was not simply defying God's will, she was stepping into a realm where knowledge became both a blessing and a curse. The same knowledge that promised wisdom would also bring pain, loss, and exile. This paradox is what makes Astaroth so profoundly connected to humanity's dual nature. He represents the infinite possibilities knowledge holds, but also the dark consequences of striving too hard for it. For every moment of clarity, there is a shadow cast, one that drags the soul into deeper waters, where it is forced to confront the cost of its enlightenment. Humanity, much like Astaroth, is forever caught in this delicate dance. The more one seeks to understand, the more one risks losing the essence of what it means to be human. As time progressed, Astaroth's influence on humanity grew, shaping not only individual lives, but entire cultures. In the ancient world, the pursuit of forbidden knowledge became an obsession, as alchemists and sorcerers sought the secrets of immortality and power. Astaroth's name would often be invoked in their rituals, a symbol of the price one must pay to see beyond the veil of the known world. These seekers knew that the path they walked was fraught with danger, that the knowledge they sought would come at a heavy price, yet they continued to walk it, driven by the same hunger that burned within Astaroth. The Renaissance brought forth another wave of seekers, philosophers, scientists, and artists who pushed the boundaries of human understanding. The thirst for knowledge became more pronounced, more desperate, as people dared to question everything they once knew about the world. In this age, Astaroth's influence was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet his presence lingered in the shadows of every great discovery. The more knowledge humanity gained, the more it seemed to unravel, revealing the darker sides of existence. New worlds were discovered, but so were new depths of despair. The Age of Enlightenment, while heralding the rise of reason and science, also highlighted the dangers of unchecked curiosity as mankind began to face the limits of its understanding, realizing that for every answer uncovered, there were even more questions. In the modern world, Astaroth's legacy endures. The thirst for knowledge remains just as intense, if not more so, as humanity pushes ever closer to the edge of the unknown. Science, technology, and philosophy continue to evolve at a rapid pace, promising answers to age-old questions while also presenting new, even more perplexing dilemmas. The line between what is beneficial and what is destructive becomes more blurred as humanity's understanding of the universe expands. Is there a point where knowledge becomes too much to bear? Can the pursuit of truth cause one to lose sight of the very purpose of existence? Astaroth watches, silently, as humanity edges ever closer to the precipice, forever playing his part in the eternal drama of curiosity, temptation, and destruction. Astaroth, the keeper of forbidden knowledge, knows this truth better than anyone. He, too, once sought understanding, once stood on the precipice of the divine, searching for the answers to questions that could not be answered. And now, he is trapped in the endless cycle of knowledge and torment, unable to escape the consequences of his own pursuit. But what makes him truly tragic is not just that he knows the price of knowledge, it's that he understands that humanity must also learn this price for itself. For Astaroth, humanity's dual nature is both a reflection of his own fall and a warning of what is to come. Knowledge, the thing he once coveted, is both the source of his damnation and the key to his eternal suffering. And as long as humanity seeks that which it cannot fully comprehend, Astaroth's influence will remain. For knowledge is a double-edged sword, its sharp blade can carve paths of light, but it can also wound the soul, leaving it broken and lost in the dark. The more one seeks, the more one risks becoming like Astaroth, trapped forever between the light and the darkness, forever yearning for answers that may never come. Astaroth's journey, one marked by defiance, damnation, and despair, is not without its moments of stark clarity, moments when the veil between his present, twisted existence and his former, radiant self as a celestial being thins ever so slightly. These are fleeting, transient encounters, like a flash of light cutting through endless darkness, reminding him of the angel he once was. It is in these moments that Astaroth is forced to confront the haunting remnants of the divine that still linger deep within him, memories of a time when he stood among the highest of heaven's ranks. It was in the quietest moments, when he wandered the desolate caverns of hell, that Astaroth first felt it. A whisper. A shimmer in the depths of his soul, so faint it could have been mistaken for a fleeting thought or a passing memory. But it wasn't. It was something else, something more real, more vivid. The echo of his celestial self, reverberating through the abyss. Astaroth stopped, his hand trembling as it reached towards the darkness that surrounded him. The weight of it, the weight of his former grace, was unbearable, yet inescapable. The once perfect wings he had shed, the voice of the divine he had lost, all of it, returning for the briefest of moments. This was not the fiery rage of a demon consumed by anger. No, this was the silent, aching sorrow of an angel, lost and broken. For Astaroth, the bitterness of his fall was not just a punishment, it was a scar that ran deep, deeper than any wound inflicted by the hand of heaven. He was forever marked by the knowledge of what he had once been, and in those brief encounters with the divine, he could feel it, the pull of heaven's light, as if it were calling to him, begging him to return. Once, when wandering through the forsaken ruins of an ancient temple, Astaroth felt a presence beside him, an energy unlike anything the depths of hell could provide. It was an unmistakable warmth, a fleeting glow of something higher. For a moment, his surroundings ceased to exist. The cold stone beneath him disappeared, the infernal winds ceased their howling, and he found himself surrounded by the soft glow of an ethereal light. It wasn't heaven, not exactly, but it was as close as he could remember. The sensation of wings, a sensation so old and familiar it caused a sharp pang in his chest. Astaroth closed his eyes, and for a moment, just a moment, he felt the presence of the divine, felt it as strongly as he once had when he stood in heaven's courts. But before he could understand what was happening, before he could reach out and grasp it, the light flickered, and the warmth receded. The vision faded as quickly as it had come. Astaroth's eyes snapped open, his breath shallow, his heart racing. His mind screamed in protest, yet he knew, deep down, that it wasn't just a dream. It was a reminder of what he had lost, what he could never have again. The divine had not forgotten him, it was he who had turned away. In the heart of hell, in the darkest pits where no light dared to linger, Astaroth sometimes heard a voice. Soft, gentle, like the flutter of a feather in the wind, calling him by his celestial name, the name he had long forsaken. It was always fleeting, always distant, as though the voice came from a realm just out of reach, from a place he could never return to. His eyes would snap open, and in those rare moments of clarity, Astaroth would question everything. Was there truly no redemption for him? Was he destined to remain this twisted shadow of his former self forever? Or was there still a chance to reclaim the grace that had once been his? Once, when he stood at the edge of a great, crumbling cliff in the deepest chasm of hell, Astaroth looked up to the dark sky. He saw, for just an instant, a flash, a vision of his former self, standing tall, wings spread, a figure of light and beauty. His heart caught in his throat. It was so real, so vivid, that he reached out instinctively, as if to touch that figure, touch the angel he once was. But the moment he tried, the vision disappeared, as fleeting as the first rays of dawn fading into night. But even in these rare and brief moments, Astaroth could sense it, there was still something within him that had not fully succumbed to darkness. He was not entirely lost. These encounters with the divine were cruel in their transience, for they offered him a glimpse of what could have been. They reminded him of the celestial glory he had forsaken, of the purity he had cast aside in his rebellion. Yet, they also tormented him, for they served as a reminder of the insurmountable chasm between what he was now and what he once was. Each encounter with his former angelic self felt like a silent plea for redemption, a subtle invitation to return. And yet, Astaroth, in his pride, would often turn away from the call. It was not because he no longer desired the divine, it was because he believed that such a return would forever tarnish the pride he had built in his fall. The pride of the fallen angel was, perhaps, the last thread of divinity that remained within him. It was in the darkest depths of the underworld that Astaroth's encounters with the divine would sometimes stir deep within him feelings that confused him. Anger and regret would flood his being, and for the briefest of moments, he would question his rebellion. Was it worth it? Was it truly worth casting aside everything he had for the illusions of power, freedom, and pride? These thoughts, these flickers of remorse, haunted him in the quiet moments when no demon was near, when no one could hear him. And in those moments, he would feel the sting of his fall more keenly than ever. But just as quickly as these thoughts arrived, they were buried deep within him, crushed beneath the weight of his defiance and the dark power he now wielded. He could not allow himself to dwell on what might have been. He could not allow the remnants of his former self to tear apart the walls he had built. Yet, deep down, Astaroth knew the truth. The divine would always be there, lingering in the shadows of his mind, reminding him that he could never fully escape what he had once been. In the end, these encounters were as much a curse as they were a gift. They pulled at his very core, threatening to unravel everything he had become. Astaroth was a creature of darkness now, but those moments, those rare glimpses of his former celestial self, reminded him of a time when he had stood in the light, unblemished, unbroken. And no matter how hard he tried to suppress them, those moments would never fully leave him. They would linger, forever haunting him, a testament to the angel he had once been. For eons, whispers have carried through the corridors of time, whispers of a prophecy long buried in the annals of forgotten realms. It is the prophecy of return, a legend that speaks of the eventual redemption of Astaroth and the fallen angels who followed him. The prophecy is cryptic, scattered through sacred texts, forbidden scrolls, and secret tomes, hidden away from the eyes of mortal men and celestial beings alike. But it persists, an undying ember in the hearts of those who dare to believe that even the most damned can find salvation. The story begins in the ancient days, long before Astaroth's rebellion cast him from the heavens. According to the myth, there was a time when the heavens themselves trembled at the thought of a great and final return, an event where those who had fallen from grace could rise once more. It is said that the day would come when the heavens and hells would bleed together, when the line between good and evil would blur, and the world would enter an age of unrelenting change. During this time, Astaroth, along with the most powerful of the fallen angels, would have the chance to atone for their sins. The prophecy does not make its claim lightly. It speaks of a celestial war, one not fought with weapons of flame and fury, but with a battle of wills. It tells of a great reckoning, where the heart of Astaroth himself, so long hardened by pride and anger, will be tested. It is said that there will be a moment, a single, fateful moment, when Astaroth will be faced with the ultimate choice, to return to the light, or to embrace the eternal darkness of his fall. But the legend warns that the choice will not be easy. Redemption, it suggests, is not a gift, it is a burden. For ages, scholars and mystics have searched for signs of this prophecy, poring over ancient manuscripts, cryptic runes, and old prophecies thought to be lost forever. Some believe that the fall of Astaroth was but the beginning of a larger cycle, one that cannot be broken until the prophecy is fulfilled. And it is said that the one who can unlock this prophecy, if they dare, will hold the power to change the fate of all existence. There are stories that tell of rare visions, where mortals have glimpsed Astaroth, not as a demon, but as the once glorious angel he had been. Some claim to have seen his celestial wings, their once golden feathers now tarnished but still glowing with an ethereal light. They speak of a time when Astaroth's great power will be used not for destruction, but for salvation. These visions, often experienced in moments of great spiritual awakening or intense meditation, tell of Astaroth's eventual return to heaven, where he will stand before the throne of the Creator, ready to beg for redemption. Other, more sinister variations of the prophecy suggest that Astaroth's return will not be a simple act of grace, but a harrowing trial. It is believed that Astaroth will come not in the form of an angel, but as a harbinger of doom, a figure of terror that will rise from the depths of hell. And in this form, he will be forced to face the consequences of his rebellion. Some versions of the prophecy speak of Astaroth being cast into the pit once again, his heart forever bound to the darkness. Others say he will rise, victorious in his trial, and that his return will herald a new era, a time when fallen angels will walk freely among men, sharing their knowledge of both heaven and hell. There are even those who claim that Astaroth's return is linked to the very fabric of the universe itself, that the celestial and infernal realms will merge, and the balance of the world will tip into chaos. If this is true, the redemption of Astaroth would not just be a personal transformation, but a cosmic event that could reshape the very foundation of existence. Such ideas, terrifying in their scope, suggest that the prophecy of Astaroth's return is not just about saving one soul, but about the salvation of all creation. If the fallen angel can find his way back to the light, then perhaps there is hope for the rest of the fallen. And perhaps, just perhaps, there is hope for the rest of humanity, too. In the circles of occultists, there are those who believe that Astaroth's redemption is a symbol, one of the eternal struggle between good and evil, light and darkness, creation and destruction. They say that the fall of Astaroth was a necessary evil, that his rebellion served to highlight the very fragility of the divine. And through this, they claim that the prophecy serves as a reminder that no being, no matter how far they have fallen, is beyond redemption. Some say that Astaroth's redemption is inextricably linked to the fate of mankind, that the path to the angels' salvation is paved with the choices of those who walk the earth. There are whispers in the corners of history, too, about a long-lost artifact, the Key of Redemption. Legends tell that this key, forged in the fires of heaven and hell alike, holds the power to unlock the prophecy. In the hands of the worthy, the key is said to have the ability to either condemn Astaroth to an eternity of torment or offer him the chance to return to heaven's embrace. The quest for the key is one that has been taken up by many kings, scholars, and demons alike, but none have returned with it. For centuries, many have pondered the true meaning of the prophecy. Is Astaroth truly capable of redemption, or is his fall so complete that he will forever remain the prince of hell? Can the fire of his pride ever be extinguished, or will it continue to burn, consuming everything in its path? The answers to these questions remain elusive, as the prophecy speaks only in riddles and omens. But the idea that Astaroth, and by extension, the fallen angels, could one day return to grace is a tantalizing notion, one that suggests that even in the deepest darkness, there is always the potential for light. As time marches on, there are those who hold on to this prophecy with unwavering faith, believing that the redemption of Astaroth is not a matter of if, but when. And they wait, quietly, patiently, for the moment when the great angel will rise from the ashes of his past, ready to fulfill his destiny. Whether or not Astaroth is capable of redemption is a question that may never be answered. But one thing is certain, the prophecy will always remain, a beacon of hope for the fallen, and a reminder that no matter how far one has fallen, redemption is never truly out of reach. When Astaroth whispered into the ears of those who sought the secrets of the cosmos, he did not simply offer knowledge. He offered a price, one so steep, so crushing, that those who accepted it were forever marked by his influence. The forbidden knowledge that he carried from the heavens to the hellish depths was a double-edged sword, capable of granting power, but also capable of tearing apart the very souls that craved it. The toll of this wisdom is not always immediate. It begins as a spark, a fleeting thought, a passing moment of curiosity. Astaroth, with his vast understanding of both celestial and infernal realms, whispers to those who hunger for truth, those who wish to peer beyond the veil of existence. He promises them a glimpse of what lies hidden from mortal eyes, secrets of creation, the understanding of life and death, the intricacies of fate. For a moment, the weight of these revelations seems bearable, even exhilarating. But as the knowledge settles within the mind, as the understanding grows, so too does the price. And the cost is always far higher than what was bargained for. It begins with the eyes that now see things no one should ever witness. For those who dare to accept Astaroth's gift, the world becomes a canvas of suffering, injustice, and unfathomable truth. They no longer see the world through innocent eyes, but through the lens of ancient wisdom, where every lie is exposed, every illusion shattered. The beauty of life becomes dulled, replaced by the cold, harsh reality of the world's true nature. The knowledge that once seemed so alluring now weighs heavily on their hearts, poisoning their ability to connect with the world around them. But it is not just the mind that suffers. No, the soul too bears the burden. Astaroth, in his pursuit of wisdom, did not simply seek the betterment of mankind. He saw potential in those who were willing to accept his teachings, but he also saw something darker, something he had learned in his own fall from grace. The knowledge that Astaroth offered was not pure. It was a twisted reflection of divine truth, marred by the corruption of his own pride and rebellion. Those who accepted it were slowly transformed by it. Their once innocent hearts became hardened, their desires distorted. They lost the ability to see the good in others, replacing empathy with a cold, calculating pragmatism. The price was most evident in the moments of great power. For those who held Astaroth's wisdom, power was no longer a distant dream, but a tangible reality. They could manipulate the elements, twist fate to their will, and bend the world to their desires. But the more power they wielded, the more they became slaves to it. Their desires grew insatiable, and their need for control became all-consuming. They began to view others not as equals, but as pawns to be moved and discarded at will. The wisdom that was once a tool to elevate humanity had become a chain, shackling them to their own dark ambitions. And then, the emptiness crept in. After the knowledge had been absorbed, after the power had been tasted, there was nothing left. The hearts of those who had sought Astaroth's wisdom grew hollow, as if the very essence of what made them human had been drained away. The pursuit of knowledge, once a noble endeavor, had become an obsession, a curse that left them feeling more lost than they had been before. They had glimpsed the truths of the universe, but they had no context for them. They could see the forces of creation and destruction at play, but they had lost the ability to understand why they mattered. The wisdom Astaroth offered had become a prison of their own making. In the end, the toll of this forbidden knowledge was not just on those who received it. It extended to Astaroth himself. In his fall, he had sought to understand the mysteries of the universe, to become more than what he was. But with every new revelation, with every new secret, he found himself further removed from the divine light he once knew. His thirst for wisdom had driven him to a point of no return. He could no longer remember what it was like to walk in the light of heaven. And as he shared his knowledge with others, he realized that the toll was not only on them, it was on him as well. For every soul lost to the darkness, for every mind consumed by the very knowledge he had given, Astaroth felt the weight of their suffering. It became a constant reminder of his own fall, a shadow that followed him wherever he went. The more he offered his wisdom to the world, the more he realized the true price of it. Knowledge, once a gift, had become a curse. And in offering it to humanity, he had unknowingly damned them to the same fate that he had suffered. The cycle continued, a never-ending spiral of hunger, power, and despair. For every soul that reached for the stars, there were countless others that fell into the abyss, lost forever to the very knowledge they sought to possess. Astaroth had become the very thing he had once despised, a symbol of the consequences of unchecked ambition, of the dangers of seeking knowledge without understanding the cost. His wisdom, though vast and infinite, had come with a price that no one could truly afford. And as he looked upon the shattered lives of those who had accepted his gift, he began to wonder if the price was ever worth it. In the end, Astaroth's wisdom had not only changed humanity, it had changed him. He was no longer the proud angel who had once stood in heaven's light. He had become something else entirely, an embodiment of the very consequences of forbidden knowledge. His fall had cost him everything, and yet, the whispers of the past continued to echo in his mind. The knowledge, once a source of power, had become his prison. And as he sat in the depths of hell, surrounded by the remnants of the souls he had helped to destroy, he could only wonder if redemption, too, had a price. The night was thick with tension, the kind that presses down on your chest and fills your lungs with the scent of impending doom. The room was dimly lit, its shadows long and unforgiving, creeping into the corners where the light dared not reach. The ritual had been set in motion, the symbols drawn in dark ink on the cold stone floor, and the air felt different, charged, as though the very fabric of reality was bending, warping, ready to tear itself apart. At the center of the room stood a lone figure, eyes wide, breath shallow, someone who had dared to call upon the one being that even the bravest souls feared. The summoner, a man obsessed with what lay beyond mortal comprehension, had spent years deciphering ancient texts, unraveling forgotten rituals, and seeking the one forbidden power that could change the course of humanity. Astaroth, the fallen angel, the keeper of secrets so ancient that even time itself trembled at the thought of them, was about to be called into the mortal world once more. The man's hands trembled as he placed the final ingredient, blood, drawn from his own veins, onto the floor in the shape of an intricate sigil. His mind raced with thoughts of power, of knowledge, of the promise of greatness. What had driven him to this moment? Was it ambition, or had he simply been lured by the whispered promises of Astaroth's forbidden wisdom? Perhaps he had become convinced that this would be his ticket to transcendence, to understanding the mysteries of the universe. But even now, as he spoke the ancient words, a part of him felt the weight of his decision, a cold realization that he was playing with something far darker than he had ever anticipated. The words fell from his lips like an incantation, ancient and foreign, yet he spoke them with authority. And as he did, the temperature in the room plummeted. The very air seemed to warp, becoming dense with an unnatural heaviness. A chill unlike anything the man had ever experienced crawled up his spine. He could feel it now, the unmistakable sensation that something was about to cross the threshold of reality itself. Then, silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, as if the world itself was waiting. The shadows, which had once been mere specters in the corners of the room, began to stir. They twisted, coiling, moving with an intelligence that sent a shiver of fear into the summoner's heart. And then it came. A figure materialized in the center of the circle, the darkness around it growing deeper, denser. The air itself seemed to buckle under the weight of the being's presence, as though the very laws of nature had given way. Astaroth, the once glorious archangel now turned demon, stood before him, a towering figure cloaked in shadows, his eyes gleaming with an ancient fire. His wings, dark as midnight, stretched behind him like a veil of doom, their tips brushing the edges of the room as if they could touch the very edges of the universe. For a moment, the summoner froze, caught in the sheer magnitude of Astaroth's presence. His heart raced, his throat went dry. The man had summoned him, yes, but now, faced with the reality of what he had done, doubt began to take root. What had he expected? What had he truly hoped to achieve? Astaroth's voice, deep and resonant, broke the silence. It was the voice of a being who had existed long before the first stars had blinked into existence, and it was the voice of one who had seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth and death of worlds. "You have summoned me," Astaroth said, his tone both commanding and curious. "But I wonder, why? What is it that you seek from me, mortal?" The summoner swallowed hard, his words caught in his throat. He had imagined this moment countless times, had rehearsed the words he would speak, the requests he would make, but now that Astaroth was standing before him, he could barely form a coherent thought. I seek knowledge," he managed to say, his voice shaking. "I seek power, power to change the world, to transcend the limitations of humanity. I have rid of your wisdom, your secrets, your understanding of the forces that govern all things. I want that. I need that." Astaroth's gaze never wavered. The fallen angel's expression remained unreadable, yet there was something almost pitying in the way he regarded the summoner. He stepped forward, his wings brushing the air with a soft, eerie sound, like whispers from another time. "You think you seek power," Astaroth said, his voice cold as ice. "But power comes at a cost. I have seen many mortals like you, obsessed with knowledge, hungry for control, and all of them have fallen. You are no different. You will learn, as they all do, that the price of forbidden wisdom is not something easily borne." The summoner, trembling, tried to stand his ground. "I'm willing to pay whatever price it takes," he said, his words desperate now. "I'm prepared. I've sacrificed so much to get to this point. I've given everything." Astaroth's smile, twisted and knowing, sent a chill down the summoner's spine. "You speak of sacrifice, but you do not understand. You cannot understand. Knowledge is not a gift, it is a burden. And to wield it, you must be prepared to carry the weight of its consequences." The air grew colder still, and the shadows around the room seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if the very walls were closing in. The summoner's heart pounded in his chest, and a deep sense of foreboding washed over him. He had not anticipated this, had not anticipated the suffocating sense of dread that gripped him now. The presence of Astaroth was overwhelming, suffocating. Every word, every gesture, carried the weight of centuries of suffering, of knowledge too dangerous to bear. "Do you still seek knowledge?" Astaroth asked, his eyes locking onto the summoner's. "Do you still desire to understand what should remain beyond your reach?" The man, now on the brink of panic, opened his mouth to speak, but the words died on his tongue. The truth was becoming clear, though he was too terrified to accept it. Knowledge from Astaroth was not the key to enlightenment. It was the key to madness, to destruction. And in this moment, the summoner realized, too late, that he had opened a door that could never be closed. The world around him began to warp and twist, the lines between reality and nightmare blurring. The shadows closed in, and Astaroth's form began to shift, as though the very essence of who he was slipping between dimensions. The summoner could feel the power radiating from him, but it wasn't power he could control. It was power that would consume him. And in the stillness that followed, the only sound that could be heard was the heavy, tortured breathing of a man who had reached too far, who had dared to call upon the forbidden, only to find himself swallowed by the very darkness he had sought to control. Astaroth stood at the crossroads of his fate, a place where time itself seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting to see which path he would take. Before him lay two paths, one bathed in light, its glow gentle, warm, almost inviting, the other shrouded in darkness, thick and oppressive, filled with the echoes of past decisions, past actions, past sins. Each path was a choice, and each choice was an irreversible step toward a future that only he could shape. For centuries, Astaroth had stood at the edge of existence, neither fully angel nor fully demon. He had fallen from grace, yes, but his fall had not been swift, nor had it been absolute. There had always been a fragment of his celestial self buried deep within him, a flicker of the light that once filled his being. And in this moment, as the light of the heavens seemed to reach out to him with an almost magnetic force, he could feel that fragment stirring. It was a familiar sensation, one he hadn't felt in millennia. A reminder of who he once was. But the darkness, too, called to him. It had been his home for so long, the shadowy realms of hell where he had risen to power. It had molded him, shaped him into the being he was today, one who had seen the horrors of existence, one who had come to understand the true nature of power, of freedom, and of choice. Darkness had given him strength, a sense of purpose, and most of all, a reason to endure. Now, as he stood before the two paths, the choice felt heavier than ever before. The light promised redemption, a return to the peace he had lost long ago. It whispered of forgiveness, of healing, of a reunion with the divine forces he had once served. But the price was clear. He would have to leave behind the power he had gained in the darkness, the empire he had built in the depths of hell. He would have to surrender the knowledge he had acquired, the wisdom that had made him the force he was today. The darkness, on the other hand, offered him something else, something familiar, something he could never abandon. It promised strength, control, and the freedom to shape the world in his image. But it also whispered of damnation, of eternal suffering, of the toll that such power demanded. Astaroth knew that the longer he walked the path of darkness, the further he would be from the possibility of redemption. He knew that with each step, he was inching closer to a point of no return. The weight of the decision was crushing, suffocating. Astaroth had been many things in his long existence, a fallen angel, a king of hell, a master of forbidden knowledge. But at this moment, he felt something entirely new, uncertainty. It was an alien feeling for him, one he had not known since his fall from heaven. And yet, here it was, gnawing at him, tugging at his heart in ways he couldn't explain. As he stared down the paths before him, he could see flashes of memories, flashes of his time as an angel, of the beauty and peace of heaven before the rebellion, before the pride that had led him astray. He remembered the love of his fellow angels, the warmth of the divine light, and the sense of belonging that had once filled his soul. But he also remembered the temptation, the whispers of ambition, the desire to surpass the Creator himself. He had chosen the path of rebellion, and it had led him here, to this moment of choice. The dark path before him, on the other hand, was filled with memories of power, of conquest, of the mastery of forbidden arts. He had created his own realm, bent lesser beings to his will, and gained knowledge that few could ever fathom. In the depths of hell, he had become something more than he ever was as an angel. He had become a force of nature, a being that could not be ignored. But at what cost? His soul had been stained by his actions, his heart hardened by the weight of centuries of darkness. Astaroth closed his eyes, trying to center himself, to find clarity in the chaos of his thoughts. But the more he tried to focus, the more the choices seemed to twist and distort before him. The light called to him, offering redemption, but it also asked him to sacrifice everything he had become. The darkness offered him power, but it threatened to consume him entirely. In that moment, he remembered something that had been buried deep within him for eons, a truth he had long since forgotten. It wasn't the path itself that defined him. It was the choices he made along the way. Whether he walked in light or darkness, it was the choices he made that would ultimately shape his future. He was no longer the same angel who had rebelled all those millennia ago. He had seen too much, learned too much, and experienced too much to ever return to the simplicity of his past. Astaroth opened his eyes, the weight of his decision settling into his bones. The light, though tempting, was not a path of peace for him, it was a path of surrender. And the darkness, though familiar, was not a path of strength, it was a path of endless isolation. Neither path would bring him the fulfillment he sought, for both were rooted in extremes that denied the complexity of his existence. So, instead of choosing one path over the other, Astaroth made a choice of his own. He would not be defined by the light or the darkness. He would carve a new path, one that acknowledged both the light he had once known and the darkness that had shaped him. He would not surrender to the past, nor would he allow himself to be consumed by the future. He would be the master of his own fate, the creator of his own destiny. In that moment, Astaroth realized that the true power lay not in the paths before him, but in the decision to create his own. The light and the darkness were simply two sides of the same coin, and he was no longer bound to either. His existence was his own to redefine, and for the first time in eons, he felt the stirrings of hope. A hope not born of redemption, but of transformation. A hope that he could still find a way to shape the world in his own image, one that was not dictated by heaven or hell, but by the essence of who he was. And so, Astaroth stepped forward, neither into the light nor into the darkness, but into a future of his own making. Astaroth stood alone in the stillness, the weight of eternity pressing against him like the crushing depths of an ocean. The choice was clear, or so it seemed, yet the path ahead was veiled in uncertainty. He had walked this earth, this realm, for countless ages, his name whispered in fear, his existence tied to the dark forces that ruled over the forgotten corners of the world. But now, as his gaze drifted upward toward the heavens, a flicker of something long buried within him, stirred. The whispers of redemption had never sounded so sweet. In the vast expanse of time, Astaroth had been many things: an angel once beloved in the courts of heaven, a fallen prince whose pride had led to rebellion, a dark lord whose wisdom had tainted his very soul. He had seen and done things that no mortal or immortal could fathom. Yet, despite it all, there lingered within him the faintest trace of the being he had once been. The one who had known peace. The one who had known love. The one who had stood alongside the divine before the treachery had taken root in his heart. Now, after millennia spent in the shadows, consumed by the power he had once craved, Astaroth found himself questioning the very path he had chosen. He had been a king of hell, a master of forbidden knowledge, a whisperer in the ears of mortals and immortals alike. Yet, in the quiet moments when he could allow himself to reflect, the bitterness of his choices gnawed at him. Power had never satisfied him the way he had imagined. In fact, it had only deepened the emptiness inside him. The dominion he ruled had become a prison, a cage that limited his true potential. Perhaps redemption was not as distant as he had once believed. Perhaps it wasn't impossible. Astaroth's thoughts turned to his former celestial self, to the angelic wings that had once been his pride and his identity. How long had it been since he had felt the warmth of the Creator's love, the harmonious peace that came with the knowledge of a purpose beyond oneself? That feeling, once so familiar, seemed so foreign to him now, as if it belonged to someone else, someone he could never be again. But the longing, the aching pull, was undeniable. Was there a way back? Could he reconcile with the divine forces that had cast him out? Could he find his way to the light once more? He had heard the stories, the whispered myths that spoke of fallen angels who found their way back to grace. Tales of redemption, of the lost finding their way home. He had dismissed them once as the naive fantasies of those who had not seen the depths of darkness that he had known. But now, they seemed to stir something within him, a possibility that had never before been so tangible. But was it too late? Could a creature like him ever be redeemed? After all, he had done so much, caused so much destruction. His name had become synonymous with temptation, with the breaking of divine law, with the very forces that had led humanity astray. Could he undo the harm he had done? Could he, a being of pure contradiction, ever be truly forgiven? The darkness whispered in his mind, as it always did. It offered power, it offered dominance, it promised an end to the emptiness that gnawed at his soul. The darkness told him that he had no need to seek redemption, that he was beyond the need for forgiveness. After all, he was the embodiment of free will, the one who had broken away from the divine order to carve his own destiny. Why should he return to the Creator who had cast him aside? Why should he humble himself before the very forces that had abandoned him? The temptation was real. It pulled at him, urging him to embrace the path he had walked for so long. But in the deepest recesses of his being, a quiet voice spoke against it. It was a voice so faint, so fragile, yet it echoed louder than all the darkness combined. The voice of the angel he once was, the part of him that had not been consumed by pride, that had known what it was like to be loved, to be a part of something greater than himself. What was the price of his redemption? Could it truly be found? Astaroth wondered if he could ever return to the purity of his former self, or if the darkness had already consumed him so completely that there was no turning back. Could he embrace the light, or was his fate sealed, doomed to walk in shadows forever? As he stood on the precipice of his own soul, he realized something. Redemption was not a path that was given to him, it was one that he had to choose. It wasn't an easy choice. It wasn't a path of salvation handed down by the divine. No, redemption would be a war against his own pride, his own past, and the very essence of what he had become. The darkness that had once been his ally, his refuge, would fight him at every turn. It would claw at his soul, whispering lies, feeding his doubts, reminding him of all that he had done and all that he was. But Astaroth knew that the true test of his redemption lay not in the absence of darkness, but in his ability to overcome it. In that, he saw a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could emerge from the shadows, not as the dark prince he had been, but as something more. And yet, even as this hope stirred within him, there was still that fear, the fear that redemption was a myth, that he had been cast out so long ago that there was no place for him in heaven, no forgiveness for a being like him. He had been given power, wisdom, and pride, and had squandered it all. How could he expect anything but the cold embrace of the abyss? But then, in a fleeting moment of clarity, Astaroth realized something fundamental. Redemption, like all things, was not about perfection. It was about choice. It was about taking the first step toward healing, toward understanding that his past, however dark, did not have to define his future. It was not too late to change. Not too late to seek the light again, even if that meant walking through the shadows first. Astaroth took a deep breath, the weight of centuries pressing against him. The struggle for redemption would not be easy, it would be long, painful, and fraught with obstacles. But in this moment, he chose the possibility of change. He chose the possibility of healing. And with that choice, the first seeds of his redemption were sown. The name Astaroth echoes through the corridors of time, etched into the very fabric of human consciousness. It is a name that stirs fear, fascination, and a profound sense of awe. Astaroth is more than just a figure from ancient myth. He has become an enduring symbol, a testament to the complexities of good and evil, pride and humility, light and darkness. His legacy is not simply the story of a fallen angel, but a reflection of humanity's own internal struggle, the battle between what is right and what is easy, between transcendence and damnation. Across centuries, Astaroth's name has been invoked in the darkest of rituals and whispered in the halls of ancient scholars. His role in history and mythology is complex, both a guide and a warning, both a teacher and a deceiver. It is a legacy that reveals the deepest fears and the highest aspirations of mankind, offering a lens through which we see our own dual nature, our tendency to both rise and fall. From the earliest days of his existence, Astaroth was revered as a figure of great power and wisdom. In the divine courts of heaven, he was once seen as a shining beacon of light, a being of intellect and understanding who was entrusted with the knowledge of the universe. He was an angel of profound insight, with an intelligence so vast it surpassed that of most others. He was not merely a creature of power, but one of thought, of reflection, of reason. And it was this very intellect, this thirst for knowledge, that led to his downfall. Astaroth's fall from grace mirrors humanity's own complex relationship with knowledge. The pursuit of wisdom, while a noble endeavor, can also lead to pride, to corruption. The very thing that made Astaroth magnificent also became his undoing. His desire to question, to challenge the divine order, ignited the rebellion that would change the heavens forever. His pride set him on a path that separated him from the Creator, and in his heart, the seeds of darkness were sown. But it is precisely this conflict, this struggle between light and dark, that has made Astaroth such a powerful figure in human understanding. He is not a mere villain, he is a reflection of the flaws that exist within all of us. His story speaks to the danger of unchecked ambition, the destructive nature of pride, but it also reveals the longing for redemption, for a return to the light. Astaroth's legacy is one of contradictions, a fallen angel, yet one who retains the potential for greatness. A prince of hell, yet still capable of questioning the very forces he serves. He is a figure who embodies the eternal tension between good and evil, between temptation and repentance, between the darkness within and the light we all long to return to. Astaroth's influence is felt not just in religious and occult circles, but in the very essence of how humanity understands the nature of good and evil. In the scriptures, in the grimoires, in the works of philosophers, and in the stories passed down through generations, his name represents a deeper truth, that there is no absolute line between light and darkness. Good and evil are not as distinct as we might like to believe, they are intertwined, shaping each other, defining one another. Astaroth's legacy forces us to confront this uncomfortable truth. Throughout history, his name has been invoked as a symbol of temptation, of the hidden dangers that lie beneath the surface of knowledge and power. He has been called upon by those who seek to master forbidden arts, to gain control over forces beyond their understanding. But Astaroth's legacy is not just about the pursuit of dark knowledge. It is also about the consequences of that pursuit. The more humanity sought to unlock the mysteries of the universe, the more it had to grapple with the weight of the knowledge they uncovered. In the medieval and Renaissance eras, Astaroth became a figure of both dread and fascination. He was often depicted as a demon, a prince of hell who could be summoned through rituals and incantations. The witch trials that plagued Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries often involved accusations of pacts with Astaroth, reflecting the fear of his influence. Yet, even in these dark times, there were those who saw him not as a symbol of evil but as a reminder of humanity's potential to rise above its limitations. He became a symbol of knowledge, of intellectual curiosity, and the consequences of seeking wisdom at any cost. In modern times, Astaroth's legacy has only grown more complex. He remains a figure of great intrigue in popular culture, appearing in literature, movies, and video games. His name is synonymous with forbidden power, with the dangers of unchecked ambition and the constant struggle for control. Yet, even in these portrayals, there is a recognition of his deep connection to humanity's own internal struggles. Astaroth is not merely a villain, he is a reflection of the darkness within us all, the part of us that seeks power, knowledge, and control, often at the expense of our humanity. In the realm of contemporary occultism and witchcraft, Astaroth has also found a place, not as a force to be feared, but as one to be understood and respected. He is a figure of power and transformation, one who represents the constant push and pull between the forces of light and darkness. For those who practice magic and the occult, Astaroth's legacy is not one of blind obedience to evil but of embracing the complexity of existence. He represents the wisdom gained through suffering, the understanding that good and evil are not separate but part of the same whole. As we look back on Astaroth's legacy, we cannot ignore the profound impact he has had on humanity's understanding of good and evil. His story is a reflection of our own internal conflict, the constant battle between our higher aspirations and our base desires. He is a figure who challenges us to confront our own darkness, to understand the consequences of our actions, and to seek redemption, not just for him, but for ourselves. Astaroth's legacy will continue to endure, for he is not merely a fallen angel. He is a mirror to humanity's soul, a reminder that the struggle between light and dark is eternal, and that our choices, no matter how small, shape the world around us. His story will echo throughout the ages, a testament to the complexities of our existence and the power of the choices we make.